You're not staying here. The words hit Miles Harlan like a physical blow, sharper than any business rival's betrayal, more devastating than any market crash. He stood in the doorway of his childhood home, the same threshold where his mother once kissed scraped knees, where Christmas mornings exploded with wrapping paper and laughter, and watched his sister's face harden into something unrecognizable. Behind her, the warm glow of the dining room mocked him with its promise of belonging. The smell of his mother's famous cornbread drifted through the crack in the door, a memory-made weapon. He'd spent $3 billion building an empire, but he'd come home with empty pockets to discover what family was really worth. Stay with me on this journey to the very end. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The sedan wheezed into the driveway like a dying animal, its exhaust pipe coughing black smoke into the pristine suburban air of Maple Ridge Estates. The sound was obscene here, where BMWs purred and Teslas hummed silently past manicured lawns. Miles Harlan killed the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden quiet, his hands still gripping the steering wheel of the 15-year-old Honda Civic he'd purchased specifically for this homecoming. Through the windshield, his mother's house looked exactly as he remembered, white colonial with black shutters, the wraparound porch his father had built the summer before the accident, the oak tree in the front yard where he'd carved his initials at age 10. The autumn sun painted everything in warm gold, the kind of light that made memories feel more real than the present moment. But Miles wasn't here for nostalgia. He climbed out of the car, deliberately leaving his worn duffel bag in the trunk. He dressed carefully for this performance, jeans with a frayed hole in one knee, a faded State University t-shirt that actually was from his college days, sneakers held together more by habit than thread. His usually sharp jaw was hidden under 2 weeks of stubble. His hair, normally trimmed every 10 days by a stylist who charged $300 per session, hung shaggy and unkempt around his ears. He looked, in every measurable way, like a man who'd lost everything. The front door opened before he reached the porch steps. Monica stood there, his younger sister by 3 years, and even from 20 feet away, Miles could see her perform a full-body assessment of his appearance. Her eyes moved from his face to his clothes to the rusted sedan behind him, and something shifted in her expression, something that might have been concern on someone else, but on Monica looked more like calculation. "Miles?" Her voice carried across the yard, pitched high with surprise. "Oh my God, Miles." She didn't move from the doorway. He mounted the porch steps, watching her face carefully. Monica had always been beautiful in that sharp, deliberate way, cheekbones that could cut glass, blonde hair that cost a fortune to maintain at that exact shade of honey gold, a body sculpted by personal trainers and discipline. Today she wore white linen pants and a silk blouse in pale blue, her jewelry understated but expensive. Her manicure was flawless. Her perfume probably cost more than his car. "Hey, Mon." Miles opened his arms for a hug. Monica stepped forward, 2 steps, no more, and gave him the kind of embrace people give to acquaintances at funerals. Brief, distant. Her body angled away from his even as her arms touched his shoulders. "When did you—" She pulled back quickly, her nose wrinkling slightly. "You should have called. Mom's having people over. It's not a good time." "People over?" Miles looked past her into the house. Through the doorway, he could see movement in the kitchen, hear the murmur of multiple conversations, smell something wonderful baking. "What's the occasion?" "Does there need to be an occasion for family dinner?" Monica's tone had shifted, defensive now. "You've been gone 4 years, Miles. We have our routines." 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days. But who was counting? "I know I should have called ahead." Miles rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture of discomfort he'd perfected in the mirror. "Things have been complicated." "Complicated how?" Monica's eyes narrowed. "The last time we heard from you, you were sending those generic Christmas cards with the San Francisco skyline. Before that, it was Seattle. Before that, San Diego." "Right, San Diego." She crossed her arms. "Mom worried you'd joined some kind of tech cult. You know how she gets." From inside the house, a voice called out, "Monica? Who's at the door? If it's those solar panel people again, tell them we already quit." Tessa appeared behind Monica, and her sentence died mid-word. Miles's youngest sister froze in the hallway, a dish towel in her hands, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock. "Holy shit," Tessa breathed. "Miles?" Unlike Monica, Tessa surged forward, pushing past their sister to wrap Miles in a real hug. She smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, and for just a moment Miles let himself remember afternoons when they were kids, when Tessa would follow him around the neighborhood like a devoted puppy, when she'd cry if he left for basketball practice without saying goodbye. "Look at you." Tessa pulled back, her hands on his shoulders. "You look like—" She stopped, her smile faltering as she actually looked at him. "Are you okay?" "That's actually why I'm here." Miles glanced between his sisters. "Can I come in?" Tessa stepped aside immediately, but Monica remained in the doorway, a human barrier wrapped in expensive linen. "Mom's really busy right now," Monica said. "Maybe you could come back tomorrow. Call first?" "Monica." Tessa's voice carried a warning. "It's Miles, our brother Miles." "I'm aware who he is." Monica didn't move. "I'm just saying, let him in, Monica." This voice came from deeper in the house, and it still had the power to make Miles straighten his spine like he was 17 again. Evelyn Harlan appeared at the end of the hallway, wiping her hands on her apron, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in the same bun she'd worn his entire childhood. She was smaller than he remembered, or maybe he'd just gotten bigger. But her eyes, sharp, dark, missing nothing, those were exactly the same. "Hi, Mom." Evelyn studied him for a long moment, and Miles had the unsettling sensation of being X-rayed. Then she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Miles, baby." She walked forward, her pace measured. "You look terrible." "I feel terrible." That, at least, wasn't entirely a lie. Evelyn pulled him into a hug, and Miles closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her perfume, the same brand she'd worn since he was a child, something floral and slightly old-fashioned. When she pulled back, her hands cupped his face, her thumbs brushing his cheekbones. "Come inside," she said. "You'll tell us everything." Monica finally moved aside, though her expression suggested she was doing so under protest. Miles crossed the threshold of his childhood home for the first time in 4 years, and the wave of sensory memory almost staggered him. The same cream-colored walls, the same family photos marching up the staircase, his high school graduation, Monica's wedding, Tessa's college degree, the last family portrait they'd taken before his father died, the same hardwood floors that creaked in specific spots, a map of sound he'd memorized as a teenager sneaking in after curfew. But there were differences too. New furniture in the living room, expensive-looking pieces in leather and chrome that replaced the comfortable, worn couch where they'd watched movies on Friday nights, a flat-screen television the size of a garage door, art on the walls that looked important and uncomfortable. "We redecorated," Monica said, following his gaze. "Finally got rid of all that old stuff." "I like the old stuff," Miles said quietly. "You weren't here to voice an opinion." The words landed like a slap. Miles turned to look at his sister, and Monica stared back without blinking, her chin lifted in defiance or challenge or both. "Monica," Evelyn's voice carried a warning. "We don't do this on doorsteps. Come. Everyone's in the dining room." Everyone turned out to be exactly what Miles had hoped for. A full house, the entire extended family gathered for Sunday dinner. His mother had always been a collector of relatives, pulling together aunts and uncles and cousins for any excuse to feed people. As he followed Evelyn through the house, he could hear them before he saw them. Laughter, the clink of glasses, someone telling a story about a golf game. They rounded the corner into the dining room, and the conversation stopped like someone had thrown a switch. 12 faces turned toward him. Uncle Raymond and Aunt Patricia, his father's brother and sister-in-law. Cousin Jessica and her husband Marcus. Aunt Claudine, his mother's sister. More cousins. Daniel, Sarah, Kevin. And at the far end of the table, rising from his chair with a smile breaking across his face like sunrise. "Miles? Jesus Christ, Miles!" Darren Harlan was 43 years old, 6 years older than Miles, and he looked exactly like their father had at that age. Same broad shoulders, same strong jaw, same way of moving through the world like he was perpetually ready to catch someone if they fell. He wore a flannel shirt over a white t-shirt, work boots that had seen actual work, and when he crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled Miles into a bear hug, Miles had to close his eyes against the sudden burning sensation. "Where the hell have you been?" Darren's voice was rough with emotion. "I've been calling your old numbers for 2 years, nothing but disconnected tones." "I know. I'm sorry." Miles let himself be hugged, let himself feel the genuine warmth radiating from his older brother. "Things got complicated." "So you keep saying," Monica muttered from behind him. Darren pulled back his hands on Miles's shoulders, and his smile faded as he took in his younger brother's appearance. "Miles, what happened?" This was the moment. Miles had rehearsed it 1,000 times in his head, practiced in mirrors, tested different emotional registers. He'd hired an acting coach for 3 sessions to perfect the right combination of shame and defeat and desperate hope. But standing here, surrounded by family, with Darren's hands still on his shoulders and his mother's eyes boring into him, and 12 faces waiting for an explanation, Miles let his shoulders slump. He dropped his gaze to the floor. When he spoke, his voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "The company failed. Everything failed. I'm broke, and I need help." The silence that followed was profound. Miles counted heartbeats, 3, 4, 5, before anyone moved. Darren's hands tightened on his shoulders. "Okay. Okay. Hey. It's okay." "It's not okay." Miles looked up, letting them see his face, the carefully constructed expression of a man at the end of his rope. "I lost everything. The business went under 6 months ago. Bad investments, worse partners, legal fees that ate through everything I had. I've been couch surfing in San Francisco, but that ran out. I'm behind on my car payment. I can't—" He swallowed hard, a technique the acting coach had taught him. "I can't keep living like this." Aunt Patricia made a small sound of distress. Uncle Raymond's expression had gone carefully neutral. Jessica exchanged a loaded glance with her husband. And Monica's eyes had gone cold and hard. "So you came here," she said. "After 4 years of nothing, you show up looking like a homeless person because you need money." "Monica!" Tessa's face flushed red. "God, have some compassion." "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Monica turned to the room. "Right? He disappears for years, doesn't call, doesn't visit, sends impersonal Christmas cards like we're distant acquaintances, and now he shows up in rags because he needs something?" "That's not fair," Darren said, but his voice had lost some of its warmth. "He's family." "Family works both ways." Monica crossed her arms. "You don't get to ignore us when things are good and come running when things are bad." Miles watched the room, tracking reactions. Aunt Patricia looked torn between sympathy and uncertainty. Uncle Raymond's mouth had thinned into a disapproving line. The cousins seemed fascinated by their plates. Aunt Claudine studied him like he was a particularly interesting specimen under glass. And his mother, Evelyn Harlan, stood at the head of the table, her face unreadable, saying nothing. "I'm not asking for money," Miles said quietly. That much was true, technically. "I just need a place to stay, temporarily, until I figure things out." "Figure things out how?" Monica's voice had taken on a razor's edge. "Do you have a plan? A job? Anything?" "I have some leads, some contacts in the tech sector who might, Monica laughed, sharp and bitter. "You're 37 years old, Miles. You don't get to show up with might and expect us to rescue you." "I never said rescue." Miles heard his own voice rising and forced it back down. "I'm asking for help. That's what families do." "Is it?" Monica stepped closer. "Because I don't remember you offering to help when Marcus lost his job 3 years ago, or when Tessa's transmission died and she needed $1,500, or when Mom had to refinance the house after Dad died and could have used some support." Each example landed like a punch. Miles felt the room shifting, the temperature dropping. These were true things, real grievances. He'd been gone, absent, focused entirely on building his empire, while his family navigated their own struggles. Of course, he'd known about every single one of those incidents. He'd been the anonymous donor who'd paid Marcus's mortgage for 6 months through a carefully laundered charitable foundation. He'd sent Tessa a cashier's check for $5,000 with no return address. He'd anonymously purchased his mother's refinanced mortgage from the bank and reduced the interest rate to nearly 0. But they didn't know that. They couldn't know that. Monica, that's enough. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice quiet but absolute. This is not the time or place. Then when is? Monica turned to her mother. When is it time to say that he doesn't just get to waltz back into our lives when it's convenient for him? He's your brother. He's a stranger who happens to share my DNA. Tessa made a small, wounded sound. Darren's face had gone hard. Miles stood very still, watching his family fracture around the axis of his presence. I should go, he said quietly. This was a mistake. Yes, it was. Monica's voice followed him as he turned toward the door. A massive mistake. Monica, stop. Darren moved between them. Just stop. He turned to Miles. Don't leave. This isn't how this works. Isn't it? Miles met his brother's eyes. Maybe Monica's right. Maybe I don't have the right to ask for anything. Bullshit. Darren's voice was firm. You're my brother. You're in trouble. That's all that matters. He looked around the room. Right? Am I the only one here who remembers what family means? The silence stretched. Uncle Raymond cleared his throat but said nothing. Aunt Patricia studied her wine glass. Jessica and Marcus seemed to have become very interested in the wallpaper pattern. Aunt Claudine spoke, her voice soft but clear. It's just that we all have our own obligations, Darren. Our own families to support. I'm not asking any of you for anything, Miles said. I'm sorry I came. I'll figure it out. He made it 3 steps toward the hallway before Darren caught his arm. You'll stay with me, Darren said. It wasn't a question. I've got the spare room above the garage. It's yours. Darren, you don't have to. I want to. Darren's grip on his arm was almost painful in its intensity. You're my little brother. We'll figure this out together. Miles looked into Darren's eyes, honest, open, concerned, and felt something twist in his chest. This was what he'd come for. This exact moment, the test. But Darren's kindness felt too real, too genuine, too much like actual love. Thank you, Miles said, and his voice came out rougher than he'd intended. I don't deserve this. Stop. Family isn't about deserves. Darren pulled him into another hug. It's about showing up, and I'm showing up for you. Over Darren's shoulder, Miles saw Monica's face. She looked disgusted. Tessa looked relieved but uncertain. His mother. Evelyn Harlan was watching him with those X-ray eyes, and for just a moment Miles had the unsettling sensation that she could see straight through him, through the threadbare clothes and the stubble and the performance, through the skin and bone to whatever darkness lived underneath. Then she smiled, and the moment passed. I'll make up a plate for you, Evelyn said. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in months. She wasn't wrong about that, though not for the reasons she imagined. Miles had been eating at Michelin-starred restaurants for years, meals that cost more than most people's car payments. But his mother's cooking, the smell of her cornbread, the way she made pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the particular magic she worked with simple ingredients, that was something money couldn't buy. The dinner continued, though the easy warmth from before had evaporated. People were polite but distant. Conversations happened around Miles rather than with him. Monica excused herself early, claiming a headache. Several of the cousins found reasons to leave soon after. But Darren stayed close, making sure Miles's plate stayed full, steering conversation toward neutral topics. Sports, weather, the new restaurant opening downtown. He told stories about his construction business, funny anecdotes about difficult clients and surprise successes. He asked Miles safe questions about San Francisco, about tech culture, about what he missed about the Bay Area. He never once asked what kind of company Miles had run, or what had gone wrong, or how bad the financial situation really was. Miles realized with a strange clarity that Darren didn't want to know. He'd chosen to help not because of information, but in spite of it, because that's what brothers did. The realization should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like ash. By 9 o'clock, only Miles, Darren, Tessa, and their mother remained. Evelyn had already begun covering leftovers, a domestic rhythm as familiar as breathing. Tessa helped with the dishes while Darren and Miles cleared the table. You'll like the apartment, Darren said as they carried plates to the kitchen. It's small, but it's private. I had it renovated last year. New bathroom, decent kitchen, good insulation. Sometimes I rent it out short term, but it's empty right now. I can pay rent, eventually. Miles hated how the lie tasted. Once I get back on my feet. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about that now. Darren paused at the kitchen doorway. Miles, can I ask you something? Here it comes, Miles thought. The real questions. The moment Darren starts adding numbers and timelines and realizes the story doesn't quite fit. Yeah, of course. Are you okay? Like, really okay? Darren's voice dropped low. Because you seem, I don't know, off. Like you're not quite here. Miles felt something crack in his chest. I'm just tired. It's been a hard year. I bet, but it's more than that. Darren set down the stack of plates he was carrying. When Dad died, you disappeared. You were physically here for the funeral, but you weren't really present. And then you left, and we barely heard from you. And now you're back, and you're telling us about business failures and money problems, but that's not what I'm asking about. He met Miles's eyes. Are you okay in your head? In your heart? The question hit like a freight train. Miles stood frozen, unable to formulate a response that was both lie and truth at the same time. I'm managing, he finally said. That's not the same as okay. It's close enough. Darren studied him for another long moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. All right, but Miles, I'm here, not just for the practical stuff, the apartment, the money, whatever. I'm here for the real things too, the hard things. You don't have to carry everything alone. Miles nodded, not trusting his voice. They finished clearing the table in silence. When they returned to the dining room, Evelyn was folding the tablecloth, her movements precise and practiced. Tessa had disappeared, probably to find Monica, to try to smooth over the earlier conflict. Your father would have liked knowing you boys are together again, Evelyn said without looking up. He worried about that, about you being so separate. Dad worried about a lot of things, Miles said. He was a parent. It's what we do. Evelyn finished folding the cloth and finally looked at him directly. Miles, I want you to know something. Whatever happened out in California, whatever mistakes you think you made, they don't change who you are. Not to me. Something in her voice made Miles's throat tight. Even if I've changed? Even if I'm not the person I was? None of us are the people we were. We grow. We fail. We learn. She crossed to him and took his face in her hands the way she had when he was small. But you're still my son. That doesn't change. Miles wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her. But he'd designed this test specifically because he didn't believe in unconditional anything anymore. Darren drove them to his place in a pickup truck that had seen better decades but ran like a dream. The apartment above the garage was exactly as advertised, small but clean, with the efficiency kitchen, a bedroom that could fit a queen bed and not much else, and a bathroom that had been updated recently. The furniture was basic but functional. The windows looked out over a quiet street lined with similar houses. Working-class neighborhood where people kept their lawns neat and their cars running. There's sheets in the closet, Darren said, showing him around. Towels in the bathroom. Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. You need anything else? I'm right in the main house. Just knock. This is perfect. Really. Miles looked around the space. Thank you. Stop thanking me. You're family. Darren headed for the door, then paused. Miles, one more thing. Tomorrow morning, if you're up for it, come down to the work site with me. I could use an extra set of hands on a residential project. Pay's not great, but it's something. And it might be good for you. Physical work. Clear your head. Miles had been doing complex financial analysis since before dawn that morning, managing a portfolio that included 17 different ventures across 4 continents. He had conference calls scheduled with venture capital firms in Singapore and board meetings with executives in New York. His assistant had probably sent him 40 emails he'd been ignoring. I'd like that, he said. What time? 6:30. Bring gloves if you have them. Well, after Darren left, Miles sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone. Not the ancient burner he'd left visible in the car, but his real phone, the one he'd kept hidden in his jacket. 43 missed calls, 67 emails, texts from his assistant, his business partner, his attorney, his accountant, the entire infrastructure of his real life demanding attention. He silenced the phone and shoved it back in his pocket. Then he lay back on the bed, which was actually quite comfortable, probably better than some hotel beds he'd paid $500 a night for, and stared at the ceiling. The test had begun. Monica had failed spectacularly, her rejection swift and absolute. The extended family had failed through silence and avoidance, their discomfort louder than any words. His mother, he wasn't sure about his mother. She'd been kind but measured, loving but somehow distant, like she was playing a part too. But Darren had passed with flying colors. Darren had been everything Miles had hoped to find and secretly feared didn't exist. Generous without condition, loving without question, willing to sacrifice for family without calculating the cost. Miles closed his eyes and tried to feel victorious. He'd found the one good person in his family, the one who'd proven that love could survive the test. Instead, he felt hollow. His phone buzzed against his leg. He ignored it. After a moment, it buzzed again, then again. Someone was calling repeatedly, probably his assistant, wondering where the hell he was and why he was missing crucial meetings. Miles turned the phone completely off. Outside, he could hear the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. A dog barking, a car door slamming. Somewhere, music playing softly. Simple sounds, normal sounds, the kind of sounds he'd built his entire empire to escape. And here he was, voluntarily returning to them, lying on a cheap bed in a garage apartment, pretending to be broke, testing whether anyone would love him when he had nothing. The really disturbing part was that he wasn't entirely sure anymore whether this was an experiment or a confession, whether he was testing them or punishing himself, whether he wanted them to fail or succeed. Miles pulled a pillow over his face and tried to remember why he'd thought this was a good idea, tried to access the cold calculation that had seemed so clear 3 months ago when he'd first conceived the plan, tried to feel the righteous anger that had fueled him through the preparations. But all he could feel was Darren's arms around him, solid and real and unconditionally accepting, and the awful certainty that before this was over, he was going to hurt his brother more than Monica ever could, because that was what tests did. They revealed truth, yes, but they also destroyed the thing being tested. Miles had built a fortune on understanding that principle. He just hadn't expected to feel it quite so personally. He fell asleep sometime after midnight, still dressed, with the lights on and his shoes tied. He slept poorly, dreaming of his father's funeral, of Monica's cold eyes, of Darren's hands on his shoulders, and of his mother watching him with that X-ray gaze, seeing everything, saying nothing. When his phone alarm went off at 6 a.m., the backup alarm on the burner phone, not his real device, Miles woke with a start, disoriented and aching. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was or why. Then it all came back. The test. Day 1 complete. 6 more weeks to go. Miles dragged himself out of bed, found the gloves Darren had mentioned in a box under the sink, and headed downstairs to meet his brother and begin the performance of learning what manual labor felt like. He hoped he was a better actor than he feared. The construction site was a half-gutted Victorian in the historic district, all exposed beams and skeletal walls, beautiful bones wrapped in Tyvek and scaffolding. Miles arrived at 6:40, 10 minutes late, his hands already blistering inside the 2 stiff work gloves. Darren was waiting by his truck, drinking coffee from a thermos, and he smiled when he saw Miles approach. "Thought maybe you'd sleep through," Darren said, offering him the thermos. "Coffee?" Miles took it gratefully. The coffee was strong and slightly bitter, nothing like the precise pour-overs he usually drank, and it tasted perfect. "Sorry I'm late. Couldn't find the gloves." "You're fine. Crew doesn't get here till 7 anyway." Darren studied him. "You sleep okay?" "Well enough." The lie came easily now. Miles had barely slept 3 hours, his mind churning through spreadsheets and moral calculations in equal measure. "What's the project?" "Full renovation for a young couple." "Tech money," ironically enough. Darren's expression flickered with something Miles couldn't quite read. "They want original details preserved, but everything else modernized. It's delicate work, expensive work." "Sounds complicated." "Everything worth doing is complicated." Darren pulled on his own gloves. "Come on, I'll show you the bones of the place before the guys arrive." They walked through the house together, and despite himself, Miles found his attention captured by the craftsmanship. The way Darren explained load-bearing walls and foundation issues, the care he took pointing out original crown molding that needed restoration, the pride in his voice when he showed Miles how they'd stabilized a staircase that was 120 years old. "You really love this," Miles said, and it wasn't a question. "I love taking something broken and making it whole again. There's honesty in it, you know? The house doesn't lie about what it needs. Studs are rotted or they're not. Foundation is cracked or it isn't. You fix it or you don't, but there's no middle ground, no way to fake it." Darren ran his hand along a beam. "I like that clarity." Miles thought about his own empire, built on algorithms and market manipulation, on predicting human behavior and exploiting inefficiencies. Nothing about it was clear or honest. Everything was middle ground. "I can see the appeal," he said quietly. The crew arrived in a cluster, 4 men in their 30s and 40s, all wearing work clothes that had seen actual work, carrying lunchboxes and coffee mugs. Darren introduced Miles as his brother, and Miles watched their faces carefully as they shook his hand. They were polite but distant, reserving judgment. He was the boss's brother, which meant he could be useless, and they'd have to work around him, or competent and therefore useful, or, worst case, incompetent but arrogant, which would make him actively dangerous on a construction site. Miles understood the calculation. He'd made similar assessments about new hires thousands of times. "Miles is getting back on his feet," Darren told them, his voice casual but firm. "He's going to help out for a while. Show him what to do, be patient, and remember that everyone starts somewhere." Tommy, the crew foreman with arms like bridge cables and a scar across his left eyebrow, looked Miles up and down. "You ever done any construction before?" "No." "You afraid of heights?" "No." "You afraid of hard work?" Miles met his eyes. "Not even a little bit." Something shifted in Tommy's expression. Not quite approval, but not hostility either. "All right then. You're with me today. We're tearing out the old kitchen. Hope you like demolition." Miles liked demolition quite a lot, as it turned out. There was something primal and satisfying about swinging a sledgehammer into drywall, about the violence of deconstruction, about reducing something to its component parts. Tommy set him up with safety glasses and a dust mask and turned him loose on a wall that needed to come down, and Miles threw himself into it with an intensity that made Tommy laugh. "Easy there, killer. We got all day." But Miles couldn't go easy. His muscles burned and his hands screamed inside the gloves, and sweat ran down his back, and it all felt like exactly what he needed. Physical pain to replace the other kind. Simple cause and effect, swing hammer, wall breaks. No complexity, no moral ambiguity. By noon, he'd demolished most of the wall, and his arms felt like they might fall off. "Lunch," Tommy called out, and the crew gathered in what would eventually be the living room, sitting on buckets and sawhorses, pulling out sandwiches and chips. Miles had forgotten to pack anything. He sat slightly apart from the group, trying not to look pathetic. Darren appeared with an extra sandwich, turkey and cheese on wheat bread, exactly how Miles had liked them as a kid, and tossed it to him. "Mom made it this morning," Darren said. "Called me at 6 to make sure you were eating properly." Miles unwrapped the sandwich, and his throat went tight. The bread was from the bakery his mother had always favored. The cheese was sharp cheddar, his preference. She'd even included a pickle spear, wrapped separately so it wouldn't make the bread soggy. "That's thoughtful," he managed. "That's Mom." Darren sat down next to him. "How you holding up?" "Good. This is good." "Liar. Your hands are shaking." Miles looked down and realized Darren was right. His hands were trembling from exertion, muscles pushed past their limit. "I'm fine." "You're stubborn. There's a difference." Darren pulled a bottle of water from his lunch bag and handed it over. "Drink, eat, rest. This afternoon we're framing in the new kitchen layout, and that requires precision. Can't have you passing out and falling off a ladder." The afternoon was harder than the morning. Framing required measuring and cutting and holding pieces in place while someone else secured them, and Miles's exhausted arms made everything difficult. But he pushed through, grimly determined not to be the weak link. Tommy warmed to him slightly, offering occasional nods of approval when Miles managed to hold a beam steady or made a clean cut. By 5 o'clock, when Darren called it a day, Miles could barely lift his arms. "You did good," Darren said as they walked back to the truck. "Better than I expected for day one, honestly." Thanks. Miles climbed into the passenger seat and closed his eyes. Every muscle screamed. We'll stop by Mom's. She texted me 3 times today asking if you were eating. I don't want to impose. Miles, stop. You're not imposing. You're family. Darren started the truck. Besides, I think she wants to talk to you. Just you. That got Miles's attention. About what? Didn't say. But you know Mom. When she gets that tone, you don't ask questions. You just show up. They drove to the house in comfortable silence, and Miles dozed against the window, exhausted in a way he hadn't been since college. When they pulled into the driveway, Monica's Mercedes was parked out front, and Miles felt his stomach tighten. She's here a lot, Darren said, following Miles's gaze, especially since her divorce. Monica got divorced? 2 years ago. Thought you knew. Darren killed the engine. Husband had an affair with his secretary. Very cliché. She got the house, but not much else. He was better at hiding assets than she thought. Miles processed this information. In his research before coming home, he'd known about the divorce. Had known everything about it, in fact, including exactly how much Monica had received in the settlement and where she'd invested it. But hearing it from Darren added context his private investigators couldn't capture. Monica wasn't just bitter, she was wounded. The realization didn't make him feel better. If anything, it made the test feel more cruel. Inside, the house smelled like roast chicken and rosemary. Evelyn was in the kitchen, and Monica sat at the dining table with a glass of white wine, her laptop open in front of her. She looked up when they entered, and her expression hardened. Of course, she said. The prodigal son returns. Again. Monica. Evelyn's voice came from the kitchen, sharp as a knife. We talked about this. We talked? I didn't agree. Miles stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of how he must look, covered in dust and sweat, his clothes filthy, his hair wild. Next to Monica's crisp, business casual, and perfect makeup, he felt like exactly what he was pretending to be. A failure, a burden. I can come back another time, he said. You'll stay for dinner. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, wooden spoon in hand like a scepter of maternal authority. Both of you. Darren, wash up. Monica, close the laptop. Miles, there's a shower upstairs in your old bathroom. Clean clothes in your old dresser. I kept some things. Of course she had. Evelyn Harlan never threw anything away that might be needed later. The shower was scalding hot and lasted 20 minutes. Miles stood under the spray and felt the day wash off him, the dust, the sweat, the performance. For just a moment, he let himself be no one. Not a billionaire, not a broke failure, just a body underwater, exhausted and real. The clothes in his old dresser fit perfectly, which shouldn't have surprised him but somehow did. T-shirts from college, jeans from his 20s. His mother had kept them all, washed and folded, waiting. He dressed in soft cotton that smelled like the lavender sachets his mother put in all the drawers. And for a moment he was 17 again, getting ready for a date, nervous and hopeful and uncomplicated. When he came downstairs, dinner was already on the table. Roast chicken, roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes, green beans. Simple food prepared with care. Darren and Monica sat on opposite sides of the table, not looking at each other. Evelyn bustled between kitchen and dining room, bringing out dishes, her face serene but her movements carrying an undercurrent of tension. Sit, she commanded, and Miles sat. They ate in silence for several minutes. Miles was hungrier than he'd realized, and the food tasted like memory. Exact replicas of 1,000 family dinners, the flavor of home itself. Across from him, Monica picked at her chicken, drinking more wine than eating food. Darren ate steadily, his attention on his plate. Finally, Evelyn set down her fork. I want to talk about the situation. There's no situation, Mom. Monica's words were slightly slurred. There's just Miles, showing up with his hand out like we owe him something. He's your brother. He's a stranger. That's enough. Evelyn's voice could have frozen fire. Both of you, stop. Miles, look at me. Miles raised his eyes to meet his mother's gaze. Those X-ray eyes again, seeing everything. I want to know what you need, Evelyn said. Specifically, not vague statements about getting back on your feet. Real plans, real timelines. This was the moment for the next layer of the lie. Miles had prepared for this. He'd built an entire fake bankruptcy story, complete with documentation he could produce if pressed. He'd rehearsed the shame, the defeat, the desperate hope for redemption. But sitting at his mother's table, in his childhood home, wearing old clothes that smelled like her love. "I don't know," he said, and it came out more honest than he'd intended. "I thought I did. I thought I had a plan, but I don't know anymore." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. "Are you in danger? Legal trouble? Anything I need to worry about beyond money?" "No, nothing like that. I made bad choices, built something on sand instead of stone, and it fell apart." "Things built on sand always do." Evelyn picked up her fork again. "But sand can be cleared away, stone can be found. The question is whether you're willing to do the work." "I am." "Then you'll stay here, in this house. Not in Darren's garage apartment." Miles blinked. "Mom, I can't." "Your old room is empty, has been since you left. You'll stay there, and you'll help me around the house. Repairs, yard work, whatever needs doing. You'll work with Darren during the day if he'll have you. You'll save money and figure out what comes next. But you'll do it here, where I can see you." Monica made a strangled sound. "You cannot be serious." "I'm completely serious." "Mom, he hasn't been here in 4 years. He doesn't get to just move back in like nothing happened. He's my son. This is my house. He's moving in." Evelyn's tone left no room for argument. "If that bothers you, Monica, you're welcome to visit less frequently." "This is unbelievable." Monica stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're choosing him, again, just like always." "I'm not choosing anyone. I'm offering help to someone who needs it." "What about when I needed help? When Todd left and I had legal bills I couldn't pay and nowhere to go?" Monica's voice cracked. "You told me I was strong enough to handle it, that I needed to figure it out myself, stand on my own 2 feet, but Miles shows up and suddenly it's all, 'Stay here, let me take care of you'?" The room went silent. Miles felt something shift, a tectonic plate moving beneath the surface of the conversation. Evelyn's face was unreadable. That was different. How? How was it different? You weren't at rock bottom. You were angry and hurt, but you had resources, income, options. Miles has nothing. Miles always has nothing when it's convenient for him. Monica's voice rose. "He's a black hole, Mom. He takes and gives nothing back, and you let him because he's your precious baby boy who can do no wrong." "Monica," Darren tried to intervene, but Monica rounded on him. "And you, giving him a place to stay, giving him a job, probably going to give him money next. When has Miles ever done anything for you? When Dad died, where was he? Gone. When you were starting your business and could have used help, where was he? California? Sending Christmas cards? But now he needs something, and you fall all over yourself to help." "Because that's what you do," Darren said quietly. "That's what family means." "No, family means showing up, being present, being there when things are hard, not just when you need something." Monica grabbed her purse and her laptop. "I can't watch this. I can't watch you all get played by him again." She headed for the door, and Miles found himself standing, his voice carrying across the room before he'd consciously decided to speak. "You're right." Monica stopped, her hand on the doorframe. She turned slowly. "You're right about all of it," Miles continued. "I wasn't there when you needed me, when any of you needed me. I left and I stayed gone, and I convinced myself that was somehow noble. That distance was safety. That if I didn't need anything from you, I wasn't a burden. But you're right. I'm here now because I need something, and that's selfish, and I'm sorry." Monica stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Miles thought she might actually forgive him, might soften. "You're damn right you're sorry," she said, and walked out. A moment later, her Mercedes roared to life and peeled out of the driveway with a squeal of tires. Miles sank back into his chair. Evelyn had her eyes closed, one hand pressed to her forehead. Darren looked like he'd aged 10 years. "Well," Evelyn said finally, "that went about as well as expected." "Mom, I didn't mean to cause—" "Stop. This has been building for years. Monica's been carrying this anger since your father's funeral. Maybe longer." Evelyn opened her eyes. "It's not about you, Miles. Not really. It's about her feeling like she's always competing for scraps of attention and losing." "Is she?" Losing? Evelyn smiled sadly. Motherhood isn't a competition, but Monica sees everything as a competition. It's exhausting. They finished dinner in subdued silence. Afterward, Darren headed home with a promise to pick Miles up at 6:30 the next morning. Evelyn started clearing dishes, waving off Miles's offers to help. "Go upstairs," she said. "Your room is ready. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be easier." Miles doubted that, but didn't argue. He climbed the stairs to his old bedroom, and when he opened the door, he felt time collapse. Everything was exactly as he'd left it 4 years ago. Posters on the walls from bands he'd loved in college, trophies from high school basketball on the shelf, books arranged by author on the small bookcase, even his old laptop, ancient and obsolete, sitting on the desk. His mother had turned this room into a shrine to who he used to be. Miles sat on the bed, the same twin bed he'd slept in until he was 18, and pulled out his real phone. 93 missed calls, over 100 emails. His assistant had sent increasingly frantic messages. His business partner wanted to know where he was for a crucial meeting with investors. His attorney needed signatures on documents worth $40 million. Miles turned the phone off and shoved it into the bottom of his duffel bag. Then he lay back on the too small bed and stared at the ceiling, at the glow-in-the-dark stars he'd stuck up there when he was 12. They still glowed faintly in the darkness. The test was working. Monica had revealed her true self. Bitter, jealous, unwilling to help without condition. The extended family had shown their limits. But Darren kept passing, kept proving himself, kept being exactly the person Miles had hoped to find. And his mother was an enigma. Caring but calculating. Generous but somehow distant, like she was watching a play she'd already seen before. Miles closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't quiet. He kept replaying Monica's words. The pain in her voice when she talked about her divorce, about feeling unchosen. The way his mother had defended him without actually defending him, offering facts instead of comfort. Somewhere around midnight, his burner phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. "You think you're so smart, testing everyone, watching us fail or succeed, but you're not the only one who can play games. M." Miles stared at the message. Monica. Somehow she had his number, and she knew, or suspected, or... His door opened without a knock, and he nearly jumped out of his skin. Evelyn stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light, her face in shadow. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "No." She came into the room and sat on the edge of his bed like she used to when he was young and had nightmares. "Want to tell me what's really going on, Miles?" His heart hammered against his ribs. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm not stupid, and neither are you. This whole thing," she gestured vaguely, "it doesn't quite add up. A company fails, fine. That happens. But you show up with nothing, no savings, no backup plan, no friends in the industry who might help. You're smarter than that, you always have been." Miles kept his breathing even, his face neutral. "Sometimes smart people make dumb mistakes. Sometimes," Evelyn studied him in the darkness, "and sometimes smart people make complicated plans that are smarter than the people around them realize." The air felt thin. Miles couldn't quite get enough oxygen. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Evelyn stood. "Get some sleep, baby. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She left, closing the door behind her, and Miles lay in the darkness with his pulse racing and his carefully constructed test feeling suddenly very fragile. His mother knew something, or suspected something, or was playing her own game within his game. Miles pulled the blanket over himself, the same blanket he'd had in college, soft from 1,000 washings, and tried to tell himself everything was fine. The test was proceeding according to plan. Monica had failed. Darren was passing. His mother was... his mother. But Monica's text message glowed in his mind. "You're not the only one who can play games." Miles had built his fortune on staying 3 moves ahead of everyone else, on predicting behavior, on manipulating systems, on seeing angles others missed. But lying in his childhood bedroom, in his childhood bed, wearing his childhood clothes, he had the horrible suspicion that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the smartest person in this particular game. And that terrified him more than any business failure ever could. The next 3 weeks passed in a rhythm Miles hadn't experienced since adolescence. Wake at dawn to Darren's truck horn. Work until noon swinging hammers and carrying lumber. Lunch with the crew, learning their stories. Tommy's daughter starting college. Rick's wife battling cancer. Carlos sending money back to family in Guatemala. Afternoons framing walls or installing drywall or learning to tile bathrooms with hands that stopped blistering and started building calluses. Evenings at his mother's table, eating dinner that tasted like forgiveness even when the conversation didn't. Monica never came back to the house, but her text messages came regularly, always late at night, always cryptic. How long are you going to keep this up? And Mom's not as blind as you think, and Darren deserves better than whatever you're planning. Miles never responded, but he never deleted them either. He fell into the role more completely than he'd intended. The threadbare clothes became comfortable. The early mornings became normal. The physical exhaustion became something he craved, a way to silence the constant calculations in his mind. His real phone stayed buried in his duffel bag, powered off, while his billion-dollar empire operated on autopilot under the management of people he paid obscene amounts of money to make decisions without him. And Darren was perfect. Patient when Miles made mistakes. Encouraging when he got things right. Present in a way Miles hadn't experienced since their father was alive. Every evening, Darren would drive him back to Evelyn's house. And every evening, Miles felt the weight of his deception grow heavier. On a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks in, Tommy pulled Miles aside at the work site. "You're doing good," Tommy said, his voice gruff. "Better than good, actually. You got an eye for this work. Darren says you're thinking about making it permanent." Miles hadn't said anything of the kind, but he nodded. "Maybe. Still figuring things out." "Well, if you stick around, there might be a spot on the crew. Pays decent. Benefits are good. Darren treats people right." Tommy paused. "Not many bosses like him. Most guys in construction, they're looking for angles, ways to cut corners, skim profits, screw over the workers. But Darren? He's the real deal." Something in Tommy's tone made Miles look up. "You sound like you've known guys who weren't the real deal." "Worked for a few." Tommy's expression darkened. "Worst was a guy 5 years back. Development company out of the city. Came in promising to revitalize the neighborhood. Bought up a dozen properties from elderly folks who couldn't afford upkeep. Paid them pennies on the dollar, promised they could stay as renters, then bulldozed everything and built luxury condos nobody local could afford." Miles felt something cold slide down his spine. What happened to the people? Scattered, pushed out. Some ended up in worse neighborhoods. Some left the city entirely. Tommy shook his head. Guy made millions. Probably doesn't lose sleep over it. That's... Miles's throat was tight. "That's terrible. It's business. Or that's what guys like that say." Tommy clapped him on the shoulder. "But not all business has to be that way. Darren proves it. He could charge twice what he does, could cut quality, use cheaper materials, hire undocumented workers for half the wage. But he doesn't, because he gives a damn about doing right by people." After Tommy walked away, Miles stood very still in the half-finished kitchen, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and fresh paint, and tried not to think about the 17 real estate development projects in his portfolio. Tried not to calculate how many families had been displaced to generate his quarterly returns. Tried not to see the connection between Tommy's villain and the face he saw in the mirror. That evening, Darren drove them back to Evelyn's house in silence. Something was wrong. Miles could feel it in the tension in his brother's shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched, the white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel. "You okay?" Miles finally asked. "Fine." "You're a terrible liar." Darren laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Pot, meet kettle." The words landed like a punch. Miles felt his pulse spike. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Forget it." Darren pulled into the driveway and killed the engine, but didn't get out. He sat there staring through the windshield at the house. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "When you were in San Francisco, running your company, what kind of company was it?" Miles had prepared for this question, had a whole story ready. A tech startup, social media analytics, venture capital that dried up. But sitting next to Darren in the truck, with the sun setting behind them and 3 weeks of honest work between them, "Why are you asking?" "Because I realized I don't actually know." "You've been here almost a month. working with me every day, living in Mom's house, and I don't know the first real thing about your life for the past 4 years. Darren turned to look at him. So I'm asking, what did you do out there? Tech sector, investment analysis mostly. Mostly, Darren's eyes were sharp. What's the rest? Property development, market speculation, venture capital. The words tasted like ash. I moved money around and made more money, that's all. That's all. Darren's voice was flat. And when it failed? What exactly failed? Miles felt the trap closing. Bad investments, market downturn, legal complications. You're being vague. I'm being private, there's a difference. Is there? Darren opened his door and climbed out. You know what? Never mind, it's none of my business. But the way he said it made it clear he thought it absolutely was his business, and Miles followed him into the house with his stomach churning. Evelyn was in the kitchen as always, but tonight something was different. The dining table was set for 4, and Miles felt his chest tighten when he saw the 4th place setting. Monica's coming? He asked. No. Evelyn didn't turn from the stove. Tessa. She called this morning. Wants to talk to you. Darren made a small sound. Did she say what about? She said it was important. That's all I know. Evelyn finally turned, and Miles saw worry written across her face. Whatever it is, we handle it as a family, together. Understood? Neither of them answered, which was answer enough. Tessa arrived 20 minutes later, and Miles knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. His youngest sister looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands shaking as she set her purse down. She'd always been the gentle one, the peacemaker, the sister who sent birthday cards and remembered anniversaries. Seeing her like this made Miles want to break something. Hey! He stood to hug her, but Tessa stepped back. Don't! Her voice cracked. Just don't! They sat at the table, all 4 of them, and nobody touched their food. Evelyn had made chicken parmesan, Miles's childhood favorite, but it might as well have been cardboard. Tessa. Evelyn reached across the table. Baby, what's wrong? I need money. The words came out in a rush. I need $15,000, and I need it within 2 weeks, and I don't have anyone else to ask. Silence. Miles watched his mother's face close down, watched Darren's expression shift from concern to something more complicated. What happened? Darren asked carefully. Tessa's eyes filled with tears. I made a mistake. A really stupid mistake. I was dating this guy, Marcus, and he said he had this investment opportunity, cryptocurrency, but like the new kind. He showed me charts and projections, and it all looked so legitimate. And I thought if I could just make some money, get ahead, not be the sister who's always struggling. Oh, Tessa. Evelyn's voice was gentle. It was a scam. Obviously it was a scam. I'm so stupid. The money's gone, and now I have credit card debt I can't pay. And if I don't come up with $15,000 in 2 weeks, I'm going to lose my apartment. Tessa looked around the table. I know I don't have the right to ask. I know Monica would say I deserve this for being an idiot. But I'm desperate. I'm so desperate. Miles felt something crack open in his chest. $15,000. He spent more than that on wine in a month. He'd tipped servers more than that at dinners he barely remembered. He could write her a check right now, and it wouldn't even register as a rounding error in his accounts. But he was supposed to be broke, supposed to be the one needing help. I can give you 5, Darren said quietly. It's not enough, but it's what I can spare right now without putting my business at risk. I can't take your money. Tessa was crying openly now. You've already got Miles to take care of. I'm not a burden, Miles said, sharper than he intended. Aren't you? Tessa turned to him. You've been here a month, living rent-free, eating Mom's food, working for Darren because he gave you a pity job. How is that not being a burden? The words were knives, made worse because they were absolutely fair. In the reality, everyone else was living. Miles was exactly what Tessa said. A failure, a drain, a brother who'd shown up broken and empty-handed. Tessa, that's enough. Evelyn's voice carried steel. We don't talk to each other like that in this house. Why not? Monica does. And she's right. Tessa wiped her eyes. I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have asked. I'm sorry. She stood to leave, and Miles found himself standing too, his chair scraping against the floor. Wait. Just wait. His mind was racing, calculating options. I might be able to help. I have some money saved. Not much, but some. Enough to cover part of what you need. Miles? Darren's voice carried a warning. From what? Tessa's eyes were suspicious. You said you were broke. I am, mostly, but I had a small emergency fund. Couple thousand I kept separate. The lie built itself as he spoke. I was saving it in case I needed to leave. Start over somewhere else. But you're my sister. You need it more than I do. I can't let you do that. But Tessa's voice wavered. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to help. Miles pulled out his wallet, the cheap one he'd bought for this performance, and made a show of checking the contents. I've got about $300 on me. The rest is in an old account. I'll need a couple of days to access it, but I can get you $2,000. Combined with Darren's $5, that's $7. It's not enough, but I'll match it. Evelyn's voice cut through the room. $7,000. But Tessa, you'll pay it back. Not all at once. We'll work out a plan. But you'll pay it back because that's how you learn from mistakes. Tessa was crying again, but different now. Relief instead of despair. Thank you. God, thank you. She hugged their mother, then Darren, and when she got to Miles, she held him tight and whispered in his ear, Monica's right about you, isn't she? You're hiding something. Miles froze. But before he could respond, Tessa pulled back, her face unreadable. I'll pay you back, she said louder now. All of you, I promise. After Tessa left, the three of them sat at the table in silence. The chicken parmesan had gone cold. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows through the windows. You didn't have to do that, Darren said finally. Give up your emergency fund. She's my sister. Miles meant it, even though everything else was a lie. Still, Darren rubbed his face. Darren, Miles, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said weeks ago. Miles felt dread pool in his stomach. Okay? I've been working on a new project, a big one. Development deal in the North End, 20 properties, mostly elderly owners who can't afford the upkeep anymore. Darren wouldn't meet his eyes. The properties are worth twice what I'm offering, maybe more. But these folks need cash now, not market value later. And if I don't buy them, someone else will. Someone who'll bulldoze everything and push everyone out. The room felt airless. Miles remembered Tommy's story, the villain from 5 years ago. The displaced families, the millions in profit. What are you going to do with the properties? Miles's voice came from somewhere far away. Renovate them. Bring them up to code. Let the original owners rent at subsidized rates if they want to stay. Sell the rest at fair market value to working families, not investors. Darren finally looked up. It's the right thing to do. But Miles, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm still making a profit, a significant profit. And part of me wonders if that makes me just as bad as the guys who bulldoze everything. Miles stared at his brother. At this good man, this genuinely decent person, wrestling with the moral implications of doing something 99% ethical in a world where 50% was considered acceptable. You're not bad, Miles said. His voice sounded strange. You're trying to do right by people. That matters. Does it? If I'm still profiting off their desperation? You're giving them options they wouldn't otherwise have. You're preserving their dignity, their homes. Miles felt like he was arguing with himself. That's not the same as exploiting them. Isn't it, though? Darren's eyes were haunted. Where's the line, Miles? When does helping become taking advantage? Miles didn't have an answer. He'd spent 15 years on the wrong side of that line, and he'd never lost a minute of sleep over it until this exact moment. I don't know, he said honestly, but I know there's a difference between you and the people who would bulldoze everything. That has to count for something. Evelyn had been silent through this entire exchange, but now she stood and began clearing plates. Morality isn't about purity, she said. It's about choosing the least harmful path when all paths cause harm. Darren's choice helps people more than it hurts them. That's the calculation that matters. After dinner, Miles excused himself to his room. He needed to think, needed to process, needed to... His real phone was ringing. He'd buried it at the bottom of his duffel bag, turned off, but his assistant had override protocols for emergencies. It was vibrating against the canvas, muffled but insistent. Miles pulled it out and answered without thinking. "What?" Jesus Christ, finally. His assistant Jennifer's voice was razor sharp. "Where the hell have you been? We've got a situation." "I told you to handle everything. I can't handle this. The Singapore deal is falling apart. The investors want to talk to you directly. They're threatening to pull $300 million if they don't hear from you by tomorrow morning their time." Miles looked at his watch. It was 8 p.m. on the East Coast. That meant it was already morning in Singapore. He had maybe 4 hours. "Set up a call. Midnight my time." "Where are you?" "I'll arrange secure video, just audio." "And Jennifer?" "Nobody knows where I am. Nobody knows what I'm doing. That doesn't change." "This is insane. You're going to lose everything if you keep—" Miles hung up. He sat on his childhood bed, in his childhood room, holding a phone worth more than most people's cars, and tried to remember why he'd thought this test was a good idea. Downstairs, he could hear Darren and his mother talking in low voices. He couldn't make out words, but he could hear the cadence of concern. They were talking about him, about Tessa, about money and family and moral calculations. Miles set an alarm for 11:30 and lay back on the bed. He'd take the call, save the Singapore deal, keep his empire running, then he'd delete the call history, bury the phone again, and go back to pretending to be broke. Back to the test. Back to the performance. But the performance was starting to feel more real than the life he'd left behind. The calluses on his hands felt more honest than the calluses on his soul. The exhaustion of physical labor felt cleaner than the exhaustion of moving billions. And Darren's moral struggle over making profit while doing good. That felt more important than anything Miles had grappled with in years. At 11:30, his alarm buzzed. Miles pulled out his phone and took the call with the Singapore investors. He spent 45 minutes in fluent Mandarin, navigating complex negotiations about valuation and market positioning and risk mitigation. He was brilliant, incisive, the version of himself he'd spent 15 years perfecting. By the end of the call, the deal was saved, $300 million was secure, and the investors were apologizing for doubting him. Miles hung up feeling hollow. He erased the call from his phone's history, powered it down, buried it again. Then he lay in the darkness and tried to sleep, but his mind kept circling back to Darren's question. Where's the line? When does helping become taking advantage? And worse, the question Darren hadn't asked but Miles was asking himself. When does testing people become torturing them? He must have dozed off eventually because he woke to his door opening. For a confused moment, he thought it was his mother again, but the silhouette was wrong, taller, broader. Miles? Darren's voice was quiet. You awake? Yeah. Miles sat up. What's wrong? Darren came in and sat on the edge of the bed. In the dim light from the hallway, his face looked older than his 43 years. I need to show you something, Darren said. Something I should have shown you weeks ago, but I was afraid. He stopped. I was afraid you'd think less of me. Miles felt ice in his veins. What is it? Not here. Tomorrow. Come to the office before we head to the site. There's paperwork you need to see. Files. Darren stood. And Miles? After you see them, if you want to leave, if you want nothing to do with me, I'll understand. He left before Miles could respond, and Miles sat in the darkness with his heart pounding, wondering what the hell his brother was about to confess, wondering if Darren's revelation would somehow be worse than his own deception, wondering if the test was about to implode in ways he'd never anticipated. At 6 the next morning, Miles climbed into Darren's truck with a sense of approaching catastrophe. They drove in silence to Darren's office, a small building downtown, nothing fancy, just a few rooms with desks and filing cabinets and the smell of coffee and old paper. Darren unlocked his office and pulled out a file box. He set it on the desk between them like a bomb. This is the North End project, Darren said. All 20 properties. Owner names, purchase prices, appraised values, renovation budgets. He opened the box. And this? He pulled out a smaller folder. This is the part I'm ashamed of. Miles opened the folder. Inside were documents, forms, something that looked like a property deed. And there, in the list of properties, one name stood out like a flare. Evelyn Harlan. 2247 Maple Ridge Drive. His mother's house. Miles looked up at Darren. What is this? The house is worth $400,000, maybe more in the current market. Darren's voice was barely above a whisper. But Mom's been struggling. Property taxes keep going up. Maintenance she can't afford. And I thought if I could buy it from her, take care of the taxes and repairs, let her stay rent-free for as long as she wants, you're going to take Mom's house. Miles felt something dark and cold unfurl in his chest. You're going to buy it out from under her. Not from under her, with her permission. She'd stay there, she'd be protected. At what price, Darren? What are you offering her? Darren's silence was answer enough. Let me guess. 100,000? 150? Enough to sound generous, but nowhere near what it's actually worth? Miles stood, the folder clenched in his hand. And then what? She lives there until she dies and you own a property worth $500,000 that you bought for pennies? It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Miles's voice rose. You're no different than the developers Tommy told me about. You're just better at justifying it to yourself. Miles, please. All this time, all your talk about doing right by people, about being better than the guys who exploit the vulnerable, and you're planning to do the same thing to our own mother. I'm trying to protect her. By taking everything she has? Miles threw the folder down. That's not protection. That's theft dressed up in good intentions. Darren's face had gone pale. You don't understand. She's going to lose the house anyway. Taxes are overdue. Bank's already sending letters. If I don't buy it, someone else will. Someone who will evict her and flip it for pure profit. Then give her market value. Give her what it's actually worth. I can't afford market value and still make the rest of the project work. The numbers don't. Then maybe the project doesn't work, Miles was shouting now. Maybe you don't get to build your empire off Mom's back. The words hung in the air between them, both brothers breathing hard, the morning sun streaming through the office window, illuminating the file box and all its awful truth. You're right, Darren's voice broke. You're absolutely right. I've been lying to myself, telling myself I'm one of the good guys while doing the same shit everyone else does. And the fact that it's Mom, he covered his face with his hands. God, what kind of person am I? Miles felt his anger drain away, replaced by something more complicated, something that felt a lot like looking in a mirror. You're human, Miles said quietly. You're human, and you're trying to do something good, and the math doesn't work unless you compromise, unless you take advantage somewhere, and you chose the person you thought would understand, who you thought you were protecting. That doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't. Miles picked up the folder. So what are you going to do? Darren looked up. His eyes were red. I don't know. Cancel the whole project. Tell Mom the truth? Try to find another way to make the numbers work? He laughed bitterly. What would you do? Miles thought about his empire, about the 17 real estate developments, about the families displaced and the profits generated, and the way he'd convinced himself that efficiency and market forces were moral goods in themselves. I'd do exactly what you're doing, Miles said. I'd find a way to justify it, and I'd be wrong too. They stood there in the early morning light, and Miles realized the test had just detonated in his hands. He'd come home to discover who in his family would love him without his money. Instead, he discovered that everyone, including him, was compromised, that there were no clean hands, no pure hearts, no simple answers, that the real test wasn't whether people were good or bad. It was whether they could face their own worst impulses and choose differently anyway. Don't do it, Miles said. Don't buy Mom's house. Find another way, even if it means the whole project falls apart. I'll lose everything. The deposits, the contracts, my reputation. Then you'll lose everything? Miles met his brother's eyes. But you'll still be able to look at yourself in the mirror. Darren nodded slowly. Okay, you're right. He took a shaky breath. I need to tell Mom before she finds out some other way. Do you want me there? Would you? Miles thought about all the reasons he should say no. About the test, the performance, the careful construction of his broke persona, about the fact that supporting Darren in this moment meant extending the deception even further. Yeah, he said, I'll be there. They drove to their mother's house in silence, and Miles had the strange sensation of being in free fall. Everything he'd built, the test, the plan, the careful performance, was crumbling around him, and he couldn't quite bring himself to care, because somehow, in trying to expose everyone else's truth, he'd stumbled into his own. And it was more damning than anything he'd been prepared to find. Evelyn was in the garden when they arrived, wearing her old gardening gloves and kneeling among the tomato plants she'd been tending since Miles was a child. The morning sun caught the silver in her hair, and for a moment Miles saw her as she must have been 30 years ago, young, strong, certain of her place in the world. Before his father died, before her children scattered, before whatever compromises she'd made to keep this house, this life, this fragile version of family intact. She looked up when their shadows fell across the garden bed, and Miles watched her face shift as she read their expressions. The trowel in her hand went still. What happened? She rose slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. Darren? Miles? We need to talk, Mom. Darren's voice was steady, but Miles could hear the tremor underneath. Inside, please. They gathered at the kitchen table like they had 1,000 times before, but the air felt different now, charged, dangerous. Evelyn made coffee without being asked, her movements automatic, buying time to prepare for whatever bomb her sons were about to drop. When she finally sat down, her hands wrapped around her mug, she looked between them with those X-ray eyes. Someone's dying, she said flatly. That's the only reason grown men look this terrified. Nobody's dying. Darren set down his coffee cup. But Mom, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you months ago. Miles watched his brother gather courage, watched him struggle with words, and felt a strange admiration for this broken moment of honesty. Darren could have hidden it, could have proceeded with the plan, could have convinced himself and everyone else that he was doing the right thing. Instead, he was choosing confession. The North End project, Darren began. 20 properties, all of them owned by elderly folks who can't maintain them anymore. I've been putting together contracts, working with a bank, trying to structure a deal that helps them and helps me build something good in that neighborhood. He stopped, swallowed. Your house was going to be part of it. Evelyn's expression didn't change. She took a sip of coffee, set it down, and waited. The taxes are overdue, Darren continued. I saw the letters from the county, and I thought if I bought the house from you, I could take care of everything. You'd stay here rent-free for as long as you wanted. I'd handle maintenance and taxes. You'd be protected. His voice cracked. But Miles made me see what I was really doing. I was planning to buy your house for a fraction of what it's worth. And I convinced myself that was okay because you'd benefit too. But it's not okay. It's taking advantage. It's doing to you what I swore I'd never do to anyone. The silence that followed was absolute. Miles could hear the kitchen clock ticking, could hear a car passing on the street outside, could hear his own pulse in his ears. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her face unreadable, and Miles realized with a jolt that he'd never actually seen his mother surprised. Not once in his entire life. How much were you planning to offer? Evelyn's voice was calm, too calm. 175,000. And the house is worth? 400, maybe 450 in the current market. Evelyn nodded slowly. That's quite a discount. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. Are you? Evelyn's eyes were sharp now. Or are you sorry you got caught? The question landed like a slap. Darren flinched. Both, maybe. I don't know anymore. At least that's honest. Evelyn turned to Miles. And you, what's your role in this confession? Moral compass? Voice of conscience? Miles felt the weight of her gaze. I just told him what it looked like from the outside. Did you? Evelyn smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. And what does it look like from your outside, Miles? What truth are you seeing so clearly? The kitchen felt suddenly smaller. Miles had the crawling sensation that he was the one being interrogated now, that his mother had somehow flipped the entire conversation. I see my brother trying to do the right thing and struggling with it, Miles said carefully. I see him wrestling with moral complexity in a way that most people don't bother with. That's a lovely answer, political, careful. Evelyn took another sip of coffee. Now, tell me what you really see. Miles looked at Darren, who was staring at the table, looked at his mother, who was staring at him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He thought about the test, about the performance, about the careful lies he'd been telling for weeks. "I see someone trying to build something good while working within a broken system," Miles said, "and I see how that forces you to compromise, to make choices that hurt people even when you're trying to help them." "Yes." Evelyn's voice was soft now. "That's exactly right. Do you know when I learned that lesson, Miles?" He shook his head. "When your father died." Evelyn set down her coffee cup. "We had life insurance, $200,000. It should have been enough to keep this house, put you kids through college, give us breathing room. But I was angry, grief angry, and I made a decision that I told myself was about securing our future, but it was really about control, about having power when I felt powerless." Miles felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew this story, knew exactly where this was going, but he couldn't stop it, couldn't interrupt, couldn't do anything but sit and listen to his mother detonate the foundation of his entire existence. "I took that insurance money," Evelyn continued, "and I invested it, not in bonds or safe mutual funds like a sensible widow. I invested it in a startup, a nobody entrepreneur with a brilliant idea and no track record. I did it anonymously through an investment group because I didn't want anyone to know. Didn't want my children to know I was gambling with their inheritance." Darren looked up, confused. "Mom, what are you—" The startup succeeded. Evelyn's eyes never left Miles's face. Beyond anyone's wildest predictions, that 200,000 turned into 20 million over 10 years. And I could have pulled it out, could have taken the money and secured all of us for life. But I didn't. I left it in. Let it grow. Watched from a distance as this brilliant entrepreneur built an empire worth billions. Miles couldn't breathe. The kitchen was spinning. His mother's voice was coming from very far away. "I've known you were a billionaire for 7 years, Miles. I've known because I'm one of your anonymous investors, because I helped fund the very first venture that started everything." Evelyn smiled, and this time it was sad and knowing and unbearably kind. "Did you really think you were self-made? That you built everything alone? You had seed money from somewhere, baby. It came from me, from your father's death, from the choice I made to gamble on you instead of protecting the rest of us." The words hung in the air like smoke. Miles tried to form a response, but his mouth wouldn't work. His entire origin story, the narrative he'd built his identity around, was cracking apart. "You knew," he finally managed. "This whole time you knew. I've known since the day you showed up in that ridiculous car looking like you'd been sleeping under a bridge." Evelyn's voice was gentle now. "And I let you do it. Let you run your little test. Let you see who would help you when you had nothing." "Why?" The word came out strangled. "Because you needed to." Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. "Because you've been so isolated for so long, so convinced that everyone only wants you for your money. And maybe you needed to see that some people would help you anyway. That Darren would give you a home and a job without hesitation. That I would feed you and shelter you and love you whether you were broke or a billionaire." Miles pulled his hand back. "But it's not real. None of it's real if you knew the whole time. Isn't it?" Evelyn's eyes were sharp again. "Darren doesn't know. Tessa doesn't know. Monica doesn't know. Their responses were real. Their choices were real. The only person performing, Miles, was you. Everyone else was being genuine." Darren was staring between them like he'd been hit with a brick. "Someone want to tell me what the hell is going on?" Miles couldn't look at him, couldn't face the betrayal that was about to dawn in his brother's eyes. "Your brother isn't broke," Evelyn said quietly. "He's worth somewhere north of $3 billion. He came here pretending to have lost everything to test whether we'd help him, to see if our love was conditional." The silence was deafening. Miles forced himself to look at Darren, and what he saw there was worse than anger. It was hurt, deep, profound hurt, like watching someone realize the person they trusted most had been lying to their face for weeks. "You were testing me." Darren's voice was hollow. "All of this, the work, the apartment, the dinners, you were testing me. Miles's throat closed. "I needed to know." "Know what?" Whether I'd love you if you were poor? Darren stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I gave you everything. My home, my job, my time, my confession about Mom's house. And the whole time you were, what, taking notes? Grading my performance? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Darren's voice rose. Explain it to me. Make me understand why my billionaire brother decided to play dress-up and manipulate his family. Because I don't trust anyone, Miles was shouting now, standing too, all the careful control shredding. Because everyone I meet wants something from me. Because I built this empire and it cost me everything human, and I needed to know if there was anyone left who'd give a damn about me if I lost it all. So you lied to us. You made us worry about you. You took Darren's money for that apartment deposit. I didn't take anything. I was going to pay him back triple. That's not the point. Darren slammed his hand on the table. The point is, you didn't trust me enough to just ask, to just be honest. You had to turn it into some kind of sick experiment. You want to talk about experiments? Miles's voice was cold now. You were planning to steal Mom's house, buy it for half its value, and pretend you were doing her a favor. Where's the honesty in that? I told her the truth, just now. I confessed because it was eating me alive. Darren's face was flushed. Can you say the same? Would you have ever told us if Mom hadn't already known? Miles had no answer, because the truth was no. He would have completed his test, collected his data, and disappeared back into his empire without ever admitting what he'd done. He would have left them all thinking he was a failure, thinking they'd helped a broken man get back on his feet, never knowing they'd been subjects in his psychological experiment. I didn't think so. Darren grabbed his keys. I need to get out of here. I can't even look at you right now. Darren, wait. But Darren was already gone, the kitchen door slamming behind him. Miles heard his truck start, heard the squeal of tires as he peeled out of the driveway, and felt something fundamental break inside his chest. He turned to his mother. You should have told me you knew. Should I have? Evelyn was still sitting calmly at the table. Would that have changed anything? You still would have needed to run your test. You still would have needed to see if people would choose you without the money. But it's meaningless now. All of it. Darren's kindness, Tessa asking for help, even Monica's rejection, none of it means what I thought it meant. Why not? Evelyn stood and began clearing coffee cups. Monica rejected you because she's hurt and angry, and those emotions are real regardless of your bank account. Tessa asked for help because she was desperate, and that desperation was genuine. And Darren, she paused, Darren gave you everything because he loves you. That love is real. The fact that you were lying doesn't make his truth any less true. Miles sank back into his chair. I've destroyed everything. Not everything. Not yet. Evelyn rinsed cups in the sink. But you're certainly doing your best. Why are you so calm about this? I've been lying to you for weeks. You've been lying to yourself for years, baby. This is just the first time you're being forced to face it. She dried her hands and came back to the table. Miles, you want to know the real reason I let you run this test? It wasn't for you to discover if we'd love you without money. It was for you to discover who you are without it. I know who I am. Do you? Evelyn's voice was gentle but relentless. Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent 15 years building an identity around your wealth, around being smarter than everyone else, around winning. And somewhere in there, you lost the person you used to be. The boy who played basketball in the driveway and helped his father build furniture and cried at sad movies. You turned yourself into a calculating machine, and now you're surprised that it's lonely. The words cut deeper than anything Darren had said. Because they were true. Miles had optimized himself into isolation, had engineered his own misery in pursuit of efficiency and profit and control. I don't know how to fix this, he said quietly. You start by being honest. Really honest. Not strategic honesty where you admit things because it serves your purpose. Actual vulnerability. Evelyn sat down across from him. And Miles? You start by acknowledging that the test you designed was really about punishing yourself. About confirming your worst fear, that you're unlovable. That's why you were so desperate to find someone who'd fail, because success would mean having to accept love, and you don't know how to do that anymore. Miles put his head in his hands. What do I do? You fix what you broke, starting with Darren. Evelyn's hand was warm on his shoulder. And then you figure out what kind of person you want to be, not what kind of billionaire. What kind of person? Miles drove to Darren's house in his real car, a Tesla he'd had shipped from California and kept hidden in a storage unit across town. It felt obscene now, this machine that cost more than most people's annual salary. He parked it in Darren's driveway next to the work truck with its dents and rust spots, and the contrast was almost painful. Darren's front door was unlocked. Miles found his brother sitting on the couch, staring at nothing, a beer in his hand even though it was barely noon. "Go away," Darren said without looking up. "No." Miles sat down in the armchair across from him. "We're going to talk. I've got nothing to say to you." "Then listen." Miles took a breath. "You're right. Everything you said was right. I came here to test everyone, to see who'd pass, to confirm what I already believed, that people only love me for my money, and you," his voice cracked, "you were perfect. You gave me everything. No questions, no conditions, just pure generosity. And instead of being grateful, instead of accepting that love, I'm sitting here terrified because now I have to live up to it." Darren finally looked at him. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No. Nothing I say is going to make you feel better. I destroyed your trust. I lied to your face. I took advantage of your kindness to prove some sick point to myself." Miles leaned forward. "But Darren, I need you to know something. These last few weeks, working with you, living in that apartment, being part of your life, it's the most honest I've been in 15 years. The money was fake, but everything else was real. My respect for you, my admiration for what you've built, the way I felt when you hugged me that first night." "Stop." Darren set down his beer. "Just stop. You don't get to do this. You don't get to tell me how meaningful it all was when you were lying the whole time." "I wasn't lying about the important things. How would I know?" Darren's voice broke. "How would I ever know what's real with you and what's just another test?" Miles had no answer, because Darren was right. He'd poisoned the well. Even his honesty now was suspect because it was coming after he'd been caught. "I'll prove it to you," Miles said, "however long it takes. Whatever I have to do. I'll prove that I'm not that person anymore." "You're exactly that person. That's who you are, Miles. A man so damaged by success that he'd rather destroy his family than risk being vulnerable." Darren stood. "And the worst part? Mom was in on it. She knew you were testing us, and she let you do it. So now I don't even know if I can trust her. You didn't just betray me, you contaminated everything." The words were knives, and Miles accepted every cut because he'd earned them. "The North End project," Miles said. "Don't cancel it. I'll buy Mom's house. Market value. $450,000. She can stay rent-free or take the money and move somewhere smaller. Her choice. And I'll fund the rest of your project. Whatever you need to make the numbers work without exploiting anyone. I don't want your money. It's not about what you want. It's about doing the right thing. You were trying to help those families. Let me help you help them." Darren laughed, bitter and sharp. "You don't get it. This isn't about money. This is about you thinking you can solve everything with money. That's your whole problem. You've been rich so long you've forgotten that some things can't be bought. Like trust." "Like trust." Darren walked to the door and opened it. "Get out, Miles. Go back to your empire. Go back to your tests and your calculations and your lonely penthouse. That's where you belong." Miles stood. At the door he paused. "For what it's worth, you passed. You passed so completely that I couldn't handle it. I couldn't accept that someone that good actually existed. So I'm destroying it because that's what I do. I find the best things in my life and I turn them into experiments and I ruin them." He met Darren's eyes. "You deserve better than me as a brother." "Yeah," Darren said softly. "I do." Miles drove back to his mother's house feeling hollowed out. The Tesla felt wrong now, obscene, a monument to everything broken in his life. He parked it in the driveway and went inside to find Evelyn in the living room with Monica and Tessa. All three of them turned to look at him, and Miles realized his mother had called a family meeting. "Sit down," Evelyn said. Miles sat. Monica spoke first, her voice icy. "So, The prodigal son is actually a billionaire. Mom just told us everything. Monica, Evelyn's warning was clear, but Monica ignored it. You tested us. You came here pretending to be broke to see if we'd help you. That's psychotic, Miles. That's genuinely disturbing behavior. I know. Do you? Monica leaned forward. Because I don't think you do. I don't think you understand what you did. I rejected you that first night. Told you that you couldn't stay here. And I've been carrying guilt about that for weeks. Guilt that you deliberately created. You made me feel like a terrible person for having boundaries. You're right. Miles's voice was flat. I weaponized your guilt. That was the point. Why? Tessa's voice was small. Why would you do that to us? Miles looked at his youngest sister. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy. Sweet Tessa, who'd asked him for money while thinking he was barely scraping by, who'd promised to pay him back, who'd trusted him completely. Because I'm broken, Miles said. Because I've spent 15 years optimizing my life for profit and efficiency, and somewhere along the way I forgot how to be human. And I came here hoping to prove that everyone is just as broken as I am. That love is always conditional. That no one can be trusted. That's not a reason, Monica said. That's an excuse. You're right. There is no reason. There's no justification. I came here to prove you all would fail, and instead I proved that I'm the failure. I'm the one who can't love without conditions. I'm the one who turns relationships into transactions. The room was silent. Evelyn watched him with those X-ray eyes. Monica looked like she wanted to throw something at him. Tessa was crying openly now. I'm going to make this right, Miles said. Starting with you, Tessa. That $15,000 you need? Consider it handled. No conditions, no payback. Just help from a brother who's been a ghost for too long. I don't want your money if it's guilt money. It's not guilt money. It's I love you money. It's I should have been there when you needed me money. It's I'm sorry for every time I chose my empire over my family money. Miles pulled out his real phone and made a transfer while they watched. There, $50,000. Enough to cover your debt and give you a cushion. Take it or don't. But it's yours either way. Tessa stared at her phone as the notification came through. $50,000. You just sent $50,000 like it's nothing. It is nothing. To me, financially, it's literally nothing. But to you, it's everything. And that matters more. Miles turned to Monica. And you. I'm sorry for testing you. I'm sorry for putting you in a position where basic boundaries made you feel like a villain. You were right to reject me that night. You were setting healthy limits, and I turned that into ammunition. Monica's expression didn't soften. Sorry doesn't fix it. I know, but it's a start. Miles stood. Mom, I'm going to buy your house. Market value. No negotiation. You can stay here or move somewhere smaller or invest it. Whatever you want. But you're not going to lose your home because of my brother's project or anything else. Miles, Evelyn began, but he kept talking. And I'm funding Darren's development project. All of it. Whatever it takes to help those families without exploiting them. He can hate me and take my money. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. You're trying to buy your way out of this, Monica said. That's all you know how to do. You're absolutely right. I'm trying to buy my way out because I don't know any other way, but maybe... Miles's voice cracked. Maybe someone can teach me. Maybe I can learn to be the person I used to be before money turned me into this. He walked to the door, then turned back. I'm leaving tomorrow. Going back to San Francisco to figure out what to do with my life. But I want you all to know something. This test? I failed it. Not you. Me. Because the point of having family isn't to test whether they'll love you at your worst. It's to let them love you at your best. And I forgot how to do that. Miles spent his last night in town at a hotel downtown. Not the luxury suite he could have afforded, but a regular room at a regular hotel where nobody knew who he was or what he was worth. He lay on the generic bed and stared at the popcorn ceiling and tried to remember the last time he'd felt like a real person instead of a walking financial portfolio. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. You owe me a conversation before you run away again. Meet me at Rosie's Diner. 7 a.m. M. Monica. Miles felt dread pool in his stomach, but he texted back. I'll be there. Rosie's Diner was a place they'd gone as kids, a greasy spoon where their father would take them for pancakes on Saturday mornings. Miles arrived at 6:55 and found Monica already in a booth, 2 cups of coffee on the table. "You're early," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I didn't want you to chicken out." Monica pushed 1 coffee toward him. "Black, 2 sugars. Some things don't change." They sat in silence for a moment. The diner was nearly empty, just a few early morning regulars and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the Reagan administration. "I'm not going to forgive you," Monica said finally. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "I understand. But I need to say something, and you need to hear it." Monica wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "When Todd left me, when he cheated and cleaned out our accounts and left me with nothing, I called you. Do you remember that?" Miles felt ice in his veins. "I remember. You sent me a check for $10,000. No note, no phone call, just a check from some anonymous foundation. And I cashed it because I was desperate, and then I spent 2 years feeling like I'd taken charity from strangers." Monica's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "It was you, wasn't it? That foundation?" Miles nodded. "And the mortgage payments when Marcus lost his job? The scholarship for Jessica's daughter? The new transmission for Tessa's car?" Monica's eyes were bright with tears. "How many times have you done this? How many times have you helped us while pretending you didn't exist?" "I don't know. A lot." "Why?" Monica's voice broke. "Why would you help us anonymously, but not just be here, be present, be a brother instead of an ATM?" Miles had no good answer. "Because I didn't know how to be both. I didn't know how to have money and have family. It felt like those things couldn't exist in the same space." "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." Monica wiped her eyes. "Miles, we didn't need your money. We needed you. At Dad's funeral, at my divorce, at Sunday dinners and birthday parties and all the normal, boring family stuff that makes life worth living. You gave us cash, but you took yourself away. And that was never a fair trade. I know that now. Do you? Or are you going to run back to San Francisco and start the whole cycle over? Help from a distance, control from the shadows. Never risk actually being vulnerable?" Monica leaned forward. "Because I've got news for you. That's not love. That's not family. That's just another way of staying isolated while pretending you're connected." The words landed like hammer blows. Miles sat with them, feeling their weight, their truth. "What do I do?" he asked quietly. "How do I fix this?" "You can't. Not completely. You broke something that might not be repairable." Monica's voice was gentler now. "But you can start by staying, not forever, but for a while. Be here. Be present. Let us see you, the real you, not the broke version or the billionaire version. Just Miles, our brother. The guy who used to sing off-key in the shower and burn breakfast and cry during Pixar movies. That guy doesn't exist anymore. Then find him." Monica stood. "Or build a new guy. A better guy. Someone who can have money and humanity at the same time. But Miles, you've got to stop running. From us, from yourself, from the possibility that people might actually love you if you let them." She left money for the coffee and walked out, and Miles sat alone in the booth where they used to eat pancakes with their father and felt something crack open inside his chest. He'd built his empire on the assumption that love was always conditional, that everyone wanted something, that trust was weakness and vulnerability was suicide. But sitting in that diner, drinking bad coffee in a town he'd spent years avoiding, Miles realized he'd built his entire life on a lie. People had loved him all along, imperfectly, inconsistently, but genuinely. And he'd been too afraid to accept it, too afraid to risk the pain of losing it, too afraid to be human. His phone buzzed. Darren. Just 4 words. Mom's property taxes due Tuesday. Miles stared at the message. This was a test too, but a different kind. Darren was giving him a chance to help without strings, without performance, without turning generosity into manipulation. Miles transferred the money immediately. Then he added a note. Property taxes paid. House deed transferred to Mom's name, free and clear. No conditions. Just love. Even if you never speak to me again, I'm sorry for everything. He hit send and waited, but no response came. Miles paid his hotel bill and packed his single duffel bag, the same one he'd brought with him 5 weeks ago. But instead of heading to the airport, he found himself driving back to his mother's house one last time. Evelyn answered the door before he could knock. "I knew you'd come back," she said. "How?" "Because you're my son, and because you're finally starting to understand that running away doesn't solve anything." She stepped aside. "Come in. We need to talk." They sat in the living room where he'd grown up, where he'd learned to walk and read and be human before money complicated everything. "I'm going to make you an offer," Evelyn said, "and I want you to really consider it before you answer." Miles nodded. "Stay, for 6 months. Not in this house. You need your own space. But in this town. Work with Darren, if he'll have you. Or find your own thing. But be here. Be present. Let us see who you are when you're not performing." "Mom." "Let me finish." Evelyn's voice was firm. "I know you have an empire to run. I know you have responsibilities. But Miles, what good is all that success if it costs you your soul? 6 months. That's all I'm asking. See if you can remember how to be a person instead of a portfolio." Miles thought about his assistant Jennifer, about the board meetings and the conference calls and the deals that needed his attention. Thought about his penthouse in San Francisco with its $1,000,000 view and its complete absence of anything that mattered. Thought about Darren's hurt face, Monica's tears, Tessa's desperate gratitude, his own reflection in the mirror, unrecognizable. "Okay," he said. 6 months. Evelyn smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her since he'd arrived. "Good. Now, there's something else you need to know. About your inheritance. About the choice I made with your father's life insurance." "You don't have to." "I do. Because you need to understand that this was never just your journey. It was mine too." Evelyn took his hand. "I gambled on you, Miles. I took money that should have gone to all of you, and I bet it on your future. And when you succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel obligated. Didn't want you to think you owed me anything. But maybe that was wrong too. Maybe you needed to know that you weren't as alone as you thought, that someone believed in you even when you were just a kid with big dreams." Miles felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. "All this time I thought I did it alone." "Nobody does anything alone, baby. That's the lesson you forgot. Success isn't solitary. Neither is failure. We're all connected, all responsible for each other, all carrying pieces of each other's stories." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "Your father would be proud of what you built, but he'd be heartbroken at what it cost you. So I'm asking you, no, I'm telling you, stay. Rebuild the parts of yourself you traded away for profit. Find out who Miles Harlan is when he's not trying to be 3 moves ahead of everyone else." Miles stayed. Miles rented an apartment above a bookstore on Main Street, a modest 2-bedroom with creaking floors and windows that rattled when trucks passed. It cost $1,200 a month, which was less than he'd spent on a single dinner in San Francisco more times than he could count. He furnished it with pieces from the local thrift store, an IKEA, a couch that sagged slightly in the middle, a kitchen table that wobbled unless you folded a matchbook under one leg, mismatched plates and cups that had belonged to strangers' lives before they became his. For the first time in 15 years, Miles lived like a normal person. And it was terrifying. The first week, he woke up at 3 a.m. every night in a panic, convinced he was missing crucial meetings, losing millions in market fluctuations, watching his empire crumble while he played house in a town that didn't even have a Whole Foods. He'd pull out his phone and scroll through emails from Jennifer, from board members, from investors who wanted his attention, his insight, his brilliant strategic mind. And then he'd put the phone down and stare at the cracked ceiling of his apartment and try to remember why he'd agreed to stay. The answer usually came around dawn, when the bakery across the street started its ovens and the smell of fresh bread drifted through his windows. It smelled like Saturday mornings with his father, like being 8 years old and uncomplicated, like a life where success was measured in Little League home runs and spelling test scores instead of quarterly earnings and market share. Darren didn't speak to him for the first 3 weeks. Miles would see him around town, at the hardware store, at the coffee shop where the construction crew gathered before heading to sites. And Darren would acknowledge him with a nod, but nothing more. No words. No forgiveness. Just the cold courtesy of strangers who used to be brothers. It was exactly what Miles deserved, and it was slowly killing him. On a Tuesday morning in his 4th week, Miles was having breakfast at Rosie's diner when Tommy walked in. The crew foreman spotted him immediately, and Miles braced for rejection, for the lecture about how disappointed everyone was, for the loss of the one place outside his family where he'd felt almost human. Instead, Tommy slid into the booth across from him. "Heard you're a billionaire," Tommy said, signaling the waitress for coffee. "News travels fast." "Small town, not much else to talk about." Tommy dumped 3 sugars into his coffee. "Also heard you're staying for a while. Living above the bookstore like some kind of monk doing penance." Miles almost smiled. "Something like that. Darren's pretty torn up about it. The lying, I mean. He doesn't show it much, but I've known him 15 years, I can tell. I don't know how to fix it." "Can't fix it." Tommy took a sip of coffee. "Can only move forward and do better. Different thing entirely." They sat in silence for a moment. The waitress brought Miles as usual, eggs, toast, hash browns, and he realized with a start that he had a usual now, that the waitress knew his order, that he'd become a regular at a diner in his hometown. "Why'd you do it?" Tommy asked. "The whole fake broke thing. What were you trying to prove?" Miles considered lying, making it sound more noble or complex than it was, but something about Tommy's direct gaze made him choose honesty. "I wanted to know if anyone would love me if I had nothing, and I wanted an excuse to believe they wouldn't, because believing nobody loves you is easier than risking that they might." Tommy nodded slowly. "That's some sad shit, man." "Yeah, it is. But here's the thing." Tommy leaned forward. "You did find out. Darren loved you enough to give you everything he had. Your mom loved you enough to let you run your test even though she knew it was bullshit. Even Monica loved you enough to be angry, and anger is just love with nowhere to go." He paused. "So now what? You got your answer. People love you. What are you going to do about it?" Miles didn't have a response. He'd spent so much energy designing the test that he'd never actually planned for what came after passing it. "I'm trying to figure that out," he said finally. "Well, while you're figuring, you still know how to swing a hammer?" Miles looked up. "What?" "Darren's crew is short a guy. Rick's wife is in the hospital. The cancer got worse, and he needs to take leave. We could use the help." Tommy's expression was neutral. "Pays $15 an hour. It's not much by your standards, but it's honest work." "Does Darren know you're offering?" "Nope, and he's probably going to be pissed, but that's between me and him." Tommy stood. "Job starts at 7 tomorrow. North End project. You coming or not?" Miles thought about his real work, the calls he'd been taking late at night, the deals he'd been managing remotely, the empire that continued generating millions whether he was present or not. Thought about how easy it would be to say no, to keep his 2 lives separate and contained. "I'll be there," he said. Tommy nodded. "Don't be late. And bring gloves. Your hands got soft again." The next morning, Miles showed up at the North End site at 6:45. The Victorian house they'd been renovating was finished now, and the crew had moved on to the first of the 20 properties Darren had acquired. It was a small craftsman bungalow, beautiful bones under layers of neglect, owned by an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, who stood on the porch watching the workers with suspicious eyes. Darren's truck was already there. Miles saw his brother talking to Mrs. Chen, his posture relaxed and reassuring, and even from a distance, Miles could see the way the old woman's shoulders gradually lowered, the way her tight expression softened. Darren had a gift for making people feel safe. Miles grabbed his tools from his car and headed toward the house. Darren saw him coming, and his entire body went rigid. For a moment, Miles thought his brother might actually turn around and leave. Instead, Darren finished his conversation with Mrs. Chen and walked over to where Tommy was organizing the day's work. "What's he doing here?" Darren's voice was low but sharp. "We needed an extra guy. He knows the work." Tommy didn't look up from his clipboard. "Got a problem with that. Take it up with me later. Right now, we've got a foundation to stabilize." Darren's jaw worked. He looked at Miles, and the pain in his eyes was a living thing. "Stay out of my way. Do what Tommy tells you. Don't talk to me unless it's about the work." "Understood," Miles said quietly. They worked in careful orbits around each other all day. Miles hauled lumber and mixed concrete and followed Tommy's instructions with the same intensity he'd brought to his first day on the job. He didn't try to talk to Darren, didn't try to explain or apologize or bridge the canyon between them. He just worked. At lunch, the crew gathered in the shade of a massive oak tree. Miles sat slightly apart, eating the sandwich he'd made that morning in his apartment. Turkey and cheese on wheat bread, exactly how his mother used to make them. He was halfway through when Carlos, one of the younger crew members, sat down next to him. "My sister wants to be a programmer," Carlos said without preamble. "But she can't afford the coding boot camp, costs like $15,000. Miles set down his sandwich. "Okay. Tommy said you're rich, like stupid rich, and I'm wondering—" Carlos looked uncomfortable. "I'm wondering if you'd consider helping her. Not a handout. She'd pay you back. But maybe you could loan her the money or sponsor her or whatever rich people do." Miles glanced across the yard to where Tommy was studiously not looking in their direction. This was a test too, but a different kind. Tommy was asking Miles a question. "Are you going to use your money to build walls or bridges?" "Tell your sister to call me," Miles said. We'll figure something out." "And Carlos?" "She doesn't have to pay me back. Education isn't a loan, it's an investment in who someone can become." Carlos's eyes went wide. "Seriously?" "Seriously, but on one condition. When she makes it, when she's a programmer making good money, she helps someone else the same way. That's how this works. We're all connected." After Carlos left, practically floating, Miles noticed Darren watching him from across the yard. Their eyes met for a moment, and something flickered in Darren's expression. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the first crack in the wall between them. The days turned into weeks, and a rhythm emerged. Miles worked on the construction site every morning, his body remembering the movements, his hands rebuilding their calluses. Afternoons he spent at the bookstore below his apartment, learning the business from the owner. And 70-year-old woman named Ruth, who'd been running the place for 40 years and had opinions about everything from modern fiction to municipal politics. "You're hiding," Ruth told him one afternoon while they were shelving new arrivals. "I'm working." "You're hiding in work. Different thing." Ruth climbed down from her step stool with the careful movements of someone whose joints had earned their complaints. "Rich man pretending to be poor. Poor man pretending to be useful. When are you going to stop pretending and just be?" "I don't know how." "Start by forgiving yourself. That's usually where people get stuck." Ruth handed him a stack of mysteries to shelve. "You made mistakes. Hurt people. Now, you're trying to make it right. That's more than most people do. Give yourself credit for that much at least. What if making it right isn't possible? Then you live with it. Carry it. Let it change you into someone better." Ruth patted his arm. "Pain is inevitable, kid. Growth is optional. Choose growth." That evening, Miles got a call from Jennifer. His assistant sounded frantic. "The Shanghai investors are pulling out unless you're there in person. The London merger needs your signature, and the board is getting nervous about your absence. Miles, you need to come back, at least for a few days." Miles looked around his small apartment, at the thrift store couch, the wobbling table, the life he was trying to build from scratch. Tell them no. What? Tell the Shanghai investors I'll video conference, but I'm not flying out. Send the London documents electronically, and tell the board I've appointed you as acting CEO for the next 5 months. You have full authority to make decisions in my absence. Miles, I can't. You can. You've been making most of the decisions anyway. I'm just making it official. Miles felt something loosen in his chest. Jennifer, I trust you. I should have said that years ago. Run the company. I'll consult remotely when you need me, but I'm not coming back. Not yet. After he hung up, Miles sat in the silence of his apartment and tried to identify what he was feeling. It took him a moment to recognize it. Relief. The North End project continued. Miles watched Darren work with each elderly homeowner, saw the care he took explaining options, the way he structured deals that actually helped people instead of exploiting them. Mrs. Chen decided to stay in her renovated bungalow, renting from Darren at a rate she could actually afford. Mr. Washington, 2 houses down, chose to sell, and Darren connected him with a working family looking for their first home, facilitating a deal that gave everyone what they needed. It wasn't perfect. Darren was still making a profit, still benefiting from these transactions, but he was doing it with transparency and dignity and genuine care for the people involved. Miles started to understand that maybe morality wasn't about finding the pure path. Maybe it was about choosing the least harmful option and being honest about the compromises along the way. On a Friday afternoon, 6 weeks into his stay, Miles was finishing up at the construction site when Darren walked over. It was the first time his brother had approached him directly since that awful morning in the kitchen. "Got a minute?" Darren's voice was careful. "Yeah, of course." They walked to Darren's truck and sat on the tailgate, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The silence stretched between them, not hostile anymore, but not comfortable either. "Tommy says you've been helping Carlos's sister and Rick's medical bills, and you paid for new equipment for the whole crew." Darren stared at his hands. "Why?" "Because I can, because it helps, because—" Miles struggled for words. "Because that's what the money should be for. Making things better, not just accumulating more." "You're trying to buy forgiveness." "No, I'm trying to figure out how to use money without letting it use me." Miles turned to look at his brother. "Darren, I know you haven't forgiven me. I know you might never forgive me. But I need you to know something. These weeks working with you, watching you navigate the complexity of trying to do good business, you've taught me more about actual integrity than 15 years in Silicon Valley ever did." Darren was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "You broke my heart. You know that, right? Not just my trust, my actual heart." "I know. I gave you everything, and the whole time you were judging me, grading me, taking notes on whether I passed your sick little test. I was wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong." "Yeah, you were." Darren wiped his eyes. "But Miles? I've been thinking about something Mom said. She said your test was really about punishing yourself, about confirming that you're unlovable. And watching you these past weeks, working your ass off, helping people, living in that terrible apartment, I think maybe she was right." Miles didn't trust his voice, so he just nodded. "So here's what I need to know." Darren finally looked at him. "Are you staying because you're trying to prove something? Or are you staying because this is where you actually want to be?" It was the most important question anyone had ever asked him. Miles thought about his penthouse in San Francisco, about the board meetings and the deals and the constant chase for the next big win. Thought about the isolation of success, the loneliness of always being 3 moves ahead, the exhaustion of never being able to trust anyone. Then he thought about his terrible apartment that smelled like fresh bread, about Ruth's bookstore and Tommy's gruff wisdom and the way Mrs. Chen had hugged him last week when he'd fixed her porch railing, about eating dinner at his mother's table and knowing his sister was okay and watching his brother build something genuinely good in the world. "I want to be here," Miles said. "Not forever, maybe. I don't know. But right now, this is the most honest I've been in 15 years. And Darren, I don't want to lose that. I don't want to go back to being that person who measured everything in dollars and lost track of what actually matters." Darren was quiet for so long that Miles thought he wasn't going to respond. Then slowly, his brother reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Just once. Brief, but real. "Okay," Darren said. "We're not fixed. We're not back to normal. But maybe we can build something new. Something better than what we had before." It wasn't forgiveness. Not complete forgiveness. But it was a door opening, and Miles would take it. That night, Miles had dinner at his mother's house. Monica was there too, and Tessa, and for the first time since everything exploded, they sat around the table together without the weight of secrets crushing them. "I talked to my therapist about you," Monica said, passing the mashed potatoes. "She said you're a narcissist with attachment trauma." "Monica!" Tessa looked horrified. "What? I'm just sharing." Monica's expression was almost teasing. "She also said that recognizing the problem is half the battle. So, Miles, congratulations on being halfway to not being a complete disaster." Miles laughed, and it felt good. "I'll take it. Halfway is better than where I was." "Much better," Evelyn said quietly. "Miles, you should know I'm proud of you. Not for the money, not for the empire. For this, for staying, for trying. I'm not sure I deserve that." "Deserve has nothing to do with it. You're my son. I'm proud of you because you're finally choosing to fight for the parts of yourself worth saving. Evelyn raised her glass. To fighting for what matters. They clinked glasses, and Miles felt something shift inside him. He'd spent 15 years building an empire of isolation, and here, in his mother's dining room with mismatched chairs and a tablecloth that had seen better decades, he was beginning to understand what he'd sacrificed to build it. The next morning, Miles went to visit his father's grave. He hadn't been there since the funeral, couldn't bear to face the marker that represented everything he'd lost and run from. But now he needed to tell his father about the choice he was making. The cemetery was quiet except for birdsong and wind in the trees. Miles stood in front of the simple granite headstone, Michael Harlan, loving husband and father, and tried to find words. I screwed up, Dad, he said finally. Built this massive fortune and lost myself in the process. Came home to test everyone and ended up testing myself. Failed pretty spectacularly. He paused. But I'm trying to fix it. Trying to figure out who I am when I'm not performing or manipulating or staying 3 moves ahead. And it's hard. God, it's so hard. The wind rustled through the oak trees that surrounded the cemetery. Mom invested your life insurance in my first startup. Did you know? Could you have known? Miles knelt beside the grave. I thought I did everything alone. Thought I was self-made, but I wasn't. You were there. Mom was there. I was never as alone as I convinced myself I was. He stayed there for a long time, talking to his father, crying in a way he hadn't let himself cry since the funeral. When he finally stood to leave, he felt lighter somehow. Like he'd set down something heavy he'd been carrying for years. The weeks continued to pass. Miles fell deeper into the rhythm of construction work, of helping Ruth at the bookstore, of having dinner with his family and slowly rebuilding the trust he'd destroyed. He started a foundation, properly this time, not anonymous, not hidden, focused on helping working families afford education and housing. He made Carlos's sister the first scholarship recipient and told her she'd get to choose the second. Darren still kept him at arm's length, but the distance was closing. They worked side by side on the North End project, and sometimes Darren would ask his opinion on a structural problem or a design choice. Small bridges built from shared work and mutual respect. Monica started texting him occasionally, sarcastic observations about their mother's meddling or complaints about her job, normal sibling stuff that felt revolutionary. Tessa called once a week just to talk. No crisis, no emergency, just conversation, and Miles learned to accept it, to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop, to believe that maybe, just maybe, people could love him for more than what he could give them. 3 months into his stay, the North End project had transformed 10 of the 20 properties. Families were moving into renovated homes they could actually afford. Elderly owners were choosing to stay in houses brought back to life. The neighborhood was healing, one foundation at a time. Miles was on a roof helping install solar panels when his real phone rang. Jennifer. He almost didn't answer. He'd gotten good at ignoring that life. But something made him pick up. Miles. We have a situation. Jennifer's voice was tense. Remember that investment group that holds 20% of the company? They're selling, and the buyer is Corinth Capital. Miles felt ice in his veins. Corinth Capital was a vulture firm known for hostile takeovers and asset stripping. They'd buy the 20% stake, use it as a wedge to force a sale, and dismantle everything Miles had built. When? Miles asked. Deal closes in 2 weeks. Miles, if Corinth gets that stake, they'll have enough leverage to push you out. They'll sell off the profitable divisions and gut the rest. Everything you built will be gone. Miles looked out across the neighborhood he'd been helping rebuild, thought about the families living in houses Darren had renovated, thought about Carlos's sister studying programming, thought about the person he was trying to become. Let them, he said. What? Let them take it. Let Corinth buy the stake. I'll sell them my shares too if they want them. Miles, that's insane. This is your company, your legacy. You'll lose everything. No? Miles felt something settle in his chest, certainty, peace. I'll lose a company, but I'll keep the things that actually matter. Jennifer, you're brilliant. You'll land somewhere better. Hell, I'll fund your next venture if you want. But I'm done. I'm choosing something different. He hung up before she could argue. Then he climbed down from the roof and found Darren supervising the foundation work on house number 12. "I need to tell you something," Miles said. Darren looked up, cautious. "Okay. I'm selling my company, letting it go. And I want to invest that money here, in this project, in this town, in building something that actually helps people instead of just generating profit." Miles met his brother's eyes. "If you'll let me. If you'll trust me to be a real partner and not just a checkbook." Darren stared at him for a long moment. "You're serious? Completely serious. I'm tired of building empires in the sky. I want to build something on solid ground, something that matters. That's a lot of money to walk away from. It's a lot of isolation to walk toward. I'm choosing differently this time." Miles took a breath. "Darren, I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I broke something between us that might never heal completely, but I'm asking anyway. Let me help. Let me be your brother instead of your betrayer." Darren looked away, and Miles could see the war happening in his expression. Pain and hope and fear and possibility all fighting for dominance. Finally, Darren turned back. "On one condition." "Anything. You stop trying to buy your way into people's hearts. The money helps, yeah. But Miles, what I need from you isn't investment capital. It's honesty, presence, the willingness to show up even when it's hard. Can you do that?" Miles felt tears on his face. "I can try. That's all I can promise. I can try." Darren studied him for another moment, then held out his hand. "Then let's try together." They shook hands, and Miles felt something fundamental shift. This was what he'd been searching for, not the test results, not the proof of conditional or unconditional love, just the willingness to rebuild, to try, to be human and flawed and present. That evening, Miles called a family meeting at his mother's house. Everyone came: Darren, Monica, Tessa, even a few cousins who'd heard through the grapevine that something important was happening. "I'm selling my company," Miles announced. "Not because I have to, because I want to, because I'm choosing a different life." Monica raised an eyebrow. "That's very dramatic. What are you going to do instead? Professional penance?" "I'm going to help Darren finish the North End project. Then we're going to find other neighborhoods that need the same care. Other families who need real help instead of exploitation." Miles looked around the room. "And I'm going to show up for dinners and birthdays and the normal, boring family stuff that makes life worth living. I'm going to be present instead of absent, human instead of calculating." "For how long?" Tessa asked. "Until you get bored? Until the novelty wears off?" "I don't know, maybe forever. Maybe until I screw it up again. But I'm committing to try. That's all any of us can do." Miles turned to his mother. "You said I needed to figure out who I am without the money. I think I'm starting to find out. And Mom? I like him better than the billionaire." Evelyn's eyes were bright with tears. "So do I, baby. So do I." Monica stood up. "Okay. I'm going to say something, and I don't want anyone to interrupt me." She crossed to where Miles was standing. "You're still an asshole for what you did. For testing us. For lying. For all of it." "I know. But..." Monica's voice softened. "You're also my brother, and I've missed you. The real you. The one who existed before money turned you into whatever you became. So if you're serious about this, about staying, about being present, about actually being family, then I'm willing to try too." She hugged him, quick and awkward, and Miles hugged her back with everything he had. "I'm serious," he whispered. "I'm so serious." One by one, his family came forward. Tessa with her generous heart, Darren with his cautious hope, his mother with her X-ray eyes that had seen this coming all along. They didn't offer perfect forgiveness. They didn't erase what he'd done or pretend it hadn't hurt. But they offered something more valuable. They offered presence, connection, the willingness to build something new from the rubble of what he'd destroyed. 6 months after Miles first drove his rusted sedan into his mother's driveway, he stood in the same spot watching the sun set over the neighborhood. But everything had changed. The North End project was nearly complete. 19 of 20 properties renovated, families thriving, a community healing. Darren stood next to him, no longer a stranger but a partner, a brother. "You know what's funny?" Darren said. "You came here to test whether we'd love you without money, and you ended up learning to love yourself without it. Miles smiled. Is that what happened? I think so. You're different now. Lighter, more real. Darren paused. The money's going through, the sale? Closes next week. Corinth Capital gets everything. They'll probably strip it for parts within 6 months. And you're okay with that? Miles thought about his empire, about the 15 years he'd spent building something that ultimately left him hollow and alone, about the person he'd become in pursuit of success and the person he was choosing to be now. I'm more than okay with it. I'm relieved. Miles turned to his brother. Darren, the money gave me options, but it didn't give me a life. He gestured at the renovated houses, the families walking on newly repaired sidewalks, the community coming back to life. This is a life. This matters. Even though you're not the genius billionaire anymore, just another guy trying to do some good. Especially because of that. Miles felt the truth of it settle in his bones. I spent 15 years trying to be extraordinary. Turns out ordinary is a lot more fulfilling. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. From somewhere down the street, Miles could hear children laughing. Mrs. Chen called a greeting from her porch. A life, ordinary and beautiful, unfolding all around him. His phone buzzed. A text from Monica. Family dinner tomorrow. Mom's making your favorite. Don't be late, or I'm eating your portion. Miles smiled and texted back. I'll be there. And he would be. Tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Not perfectly. Not without struggle, but present, human, real. The test was over. He'd failed it in every way that mattered and succeeded in the only way that did. He'd learned that love wasn't about conditions or calculations or staying 3 moves ahead. It was about showing up, being vulnerable, accepting that people might hurt you and choosing to risk it anyway. It was about trading the empire for the family, the portfolio for the person, the genius for the guy. And standing there in his hometown as the sun set over the neighborhood he'd helped rebuild, Miles Harlan felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. He felt like he'd finally come home. The sale closed the following Tuesday. Miles signed away his empire with a simple electronic signature, watching billions of dollars transfer to Corinth Capital with the same emotional investment he'd give to buying groceries. Jennifer called immediately after, her voice tight with controlled panic. It's done. You're not a billionaire anymore. Miles, are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything, Miles said, and meant it. What am I supposed to tell people? The investors who trusted you? The employees whose jobs are about to disappear? Tell them the truth. That I chose something different. That success isn't just about profit. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Miles paused. And Jennifer? Thank you. For everything. You deserved better than working for someone who'd forgotten how to be human. After he hung up, Miles sat in his small apartment and waited to feel regret. Waited for the panic or the loss or the sense that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Instead, he felt light, free. The next morning, he showed up at the construction site at his usual time. Darren was already there going over plans with Tommy and the crew. When Miles approached, work stopped. Everyone knew the sale had happened. News had traveled fast. Tommy spoke first. So, you're officially poor now. Relatively speaking, yeah. Still got that apartment above the bookstore? Signed a year lease last week. Still planning to work for $15 an hour? Miles smiled. If you'll have me. Tommy looked at Darren, who nodded slightly. Then Tommy clapped Miles on the shoulder, his grip firm and warm. Then grab your tools, rich boy. We've got work to do. They worked all day on house number 20, the last property in the North End project. It belonged to an elderly veteran named Mr. Patterson, who'd lived there for 50 years and couldn't afford the repairs his house desperately needed. Miles spent the afternoon replacing rotted floor joists while Mr. Patterson sat on the porch telling stories about Korea and his late wife and the neighborhood as it used to be. My grandson thinks I should sell, Mr. Patterson said during a break. Move to one of those senior communities. Says this house is too much for an old man. Is it? Miles asked. Maybe. But it's my house, my memories, the place I brought my bride home to, where my kids grew up, where I said goodbye to my wife. Mr. Patterson looked at the house with profound love. Your brother says I can stay, says the renovations will make it safe and affordable. Is that true? It's true. Darren keeps his promises. Then I'm staying. Mr. Patterson smiled. Some things are worth more than money. Took me 83 years to learn that. How old are you? 37. Lucky man. You figured it out 46 years earlier than me. That evening, Miles had dinner at his mother's house. The whole family was there, Darren and his girlfriend Kelly, Monica, and her new boyfriend James, Tessa, and her roommate Sarah. They crowded around the table that was too small for this many people. Passing dishes and talking over each other and laughing at shared jokes, Miles was slowly learning to understand again. You really did it, Monica said, raising her wine glass. Sold everything. Walked away from billions. Either you're the bravest person I know or the stupidest. Can it be both? Miles asked. Probably is. Monica smiled. But I'm proud of you. I never thought I'd say that, but I am. I'm proud of him too, Tessa added. Carlos's sister got her first programming job, by the way. She starts next month. The scholarship you gave her changed her life. She changed her own life. I just removed a barrier. That's what money should do, Evelyn said quietly. Remove barriers, build bridges, make things possible that weren't before, not isolate the person who has it. After dinner, Darren pulled Miles aside. They walked out to the backyard where they'd played as kids, where their father had taught them to throw a baseball and build a treehouse and be brothers. I have something to tell you, Darren said. The North End project, all 20 properties are done, finished ahead of schedule, under budget. That's incredible. It's because of you. The money you invested, yeah, but also the work, the time, the way you showed up every single day. Darren took a breath. I've been thinking. There are 12 other neighborhoods in this city that need the same help. Hundreds of properties, thousands of families. We could do it, Miles. Together. Build something that actually matters. Miles felt possibility unfurl in his chest. You trust me enough for that? I'm getting there. But Miles, this can't be about your redemption. It has to be about actually helping people. Can you do that? Can you put their needs ahead of your own? I can try. That's all I can promise. I can try. That's enough. Darren held out his hand. Partners? Miles shook his brother's hand and felt the last piece of his old life fall away. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. Wasn't a genius entrepreneur or a strategic mastermind or any of the other things he'd built his identity around. He was just Miles. A guy trying to make amends. A brother learning to be present. A person figuring out how to be human again. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 3 months later, Miles stood in front of a packed community center giving a presentation about the new Neighborhood Revitalization Initiative. The room was full of elderly homeowners, working families, local politicians, and reporters. Darren stood next to him, and together they explained their vision: affordable renovations, sustainable housing, community investment that actually served the community. We're not developers looking to make a profit, Miles said into the microphone. We're neighbors looking to help neighbors. Every dollar we make goes back into the next project, the next neighborhood, the next family that needs help. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Harlan, you were worth over $3 billion 6 months ago. Now you're living in a one-bedroom apartment and working construction for minimum wage. Do you regret selling your company? Miles looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who'd invited him into their lives, their homes, their struggles, at Mr. Patterson in the front row, at Mrs. Chen next to him, at his family standing in the back, watching with cautious pride. Not even for a second, Miles said. I spent 15 years building an empire that left me isolated and empty. Now I'm building something different, something that actually matters. And for the first time in my adult life, I'm not lonely. The reporter scribbled notes. What would you say to other wealthy people who might be similarly isolated? Miles thought about all the people in his old life. The other billionaires playing the same game, measuring worth in zeros, trading humanity for market share. He thought about the person he used to be and the person he was choosing to become. I'd say that wealth is a tool, not an identity. That you can have all the money in the world and still be bankrupt in the ways that matter. And that the bravest thing you can do is choose connection over control, Community over capital, love over leverage. Miles paused. Money doesn't make you happy. People do. It took me billions of dollars and complete collapse to learn that. I hope others can learn it cheaper. After the presentation, the crowd dispersed slowly. People came up to shake Miles's hand, to thank him, to share their own stories of struggle and hope. Miles listened to each one, really listened, in a way he'd never done when he was busy being important. His mother found him as he was packing up. "Your father would be proud," she said softly. "Not of what you built, of what you became after you lost it." "I didn't lose it, Mom. I gave it away. There's a difference." "Is there?" Evelyn smiled. "Either way, you found yourself. That's what matters." That night, Miles walked back to his apartment through streets he'd once driven past without seeing. He stopped at Rosie's diner for coffee, chatted with the waitress who knew his order, waved to the owner of the hardware store closing up for the night. Simple interactions. Normal life. The kind of ordinary that used to terrify him and now felt like coming home. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Jennifer. Just wanted you to know Corinth stripped the company and sold it for parts, just like you predicted. Everything you built is gone. Thought you should hear it from me. Also, I'm starting my own venture. Small, ethical, human scale. You were right about choosing differently. Thanks for showing me it was possible." Miles smiled and texted back. "Good luck. And Jennifer, if you ever need an investor, I know a guy who's learning to use money for good instead of just accumulation." He climbed the stairs to his apartment, unlocked the door, and stood for a moment in the space he'd made his own. It wasn't much. Thrift store furniture and cheap dishes and a view of Main Street instead of San Francisco Bay. But it was real. It was his. And every single thing in it had been chosen not for its value, but for how it made him feel. Human. Connected. Home. Miles made himself dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and vegetables from the farmer's market, and ate while reading a book Ruth had recommended from the store downstairs. After dinner, he washed dishes by hand in his small sink and thought about the next day's work at the construction site, about the family dinner on Sunday, about the ordinary, beautiful rhythm of a life built on presence instead of performance. His real phone, the expensive one that used to control his empire, sat in a drawer, mostly silent now. Sometimes it buzzed with news about Corinth's dismantling of his company. Sometimes old colleagues reached out, confused about his choices, wondering if he'd had a breakdown. Miles never responded. There was nothing to explain. You couldn't understand the peace of letting go until you'd felt the exhaustion of holding on. He fell asleep early, tired from honest work, and dreamed not of spreadsheets or market fluctuations or strategic advantages, but of the house he and Darren would renovate tomorrow, of families moving into homes they could afford, of a community healing one foundation at a time. And when he woke the next morning to the smell of fresh bread from the bakery across the street, Miles Harlan, formerly a billionaire, currently a construction worker, perpetually a work in progress, smiled, because he'd finally learned the truth that had eluded him for 15 years. The best things in life can't be tested, can't be calculated, can't be purchased or controlled or optimized. They can only be accepted. With all their complexity and contradiction and imperfection, they can only be loved. And love, it turned out, was the one thing worth more than all the money in the world. The thing he'd been searching for all along. The thing that had been waiting for him patiently in the last place he thought to look. Home.